In the decommissioned underground factory, the ghostly fire had been extinguished. Dozens of Awakened were moving, preparing to depart. All of them had summoned luminous memories, and the dancing lights made the shadows populating the vast production hall reluctantly retreat. Ascended Morrow was standing in front of a sturdy wall, looking at it with a somber expression. Eventually, she nodded and glanced at one of her subordinates. "This is the spot, isolate it." The city was constantly being monitored by countless seismic sensors on account of nightmare creatures often burrowing underground, so nothing less would do if they wanted to remain unnoticed. Satisfied, Morrow raised a hand and clicked her fingers. A moment later, a violent sonic boom resounded, and a large portion of the wall in front of her shattered into dust. Behind it, an entrance to a tunnel was revealed, drowned in darkness. Cold wind entered the production hall, making the Awakened shiver. Even Morrow herself suddenly felt uneasy. For whatever reason, with a frown, she lowered her hand and said evenly, "Clear the debris. The entrance should be wide enough for the cage to fit. Second cohort, scout out the tunnel and make sure that there are no blockages there." 7 Awakened jumped down into the darkness, while the rest of her subordinates got busy preparing the hole she created for the creature's cage. The cohort in charge of keeping an eye on the abominations was going to bring it any minute now. Lowering the massive containment device down wouldn't be easy, but they had come prepared. The man in the uniform of the evacuation army watched the process with a worried face. After a minute, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, I will be going then. My job here is done." Morrow glanced at him indifferently and told him to go. The thrall was of no use anymore. Their escape from the city would be handled by a different sleeper cell. If it was up to her, she would have gotten rid of the man and his people to clean up loose ends, but they could become useful in the future. Even mundanes could do a lot of harm if armed with the right tools, although Morrow felt it was beneath her to use vulgar weapons of the bygone era. In the grand scheme of things, not even crude instruments like that could be neglected. Others might not have known, but she understood what was at stake. The man disappeared, and the entrance to the tunnel was cleared. Their exodus from the underground factory was being dragged out. However, because the creature cage was slow to arrive, Morrow felt irritated and wondered what was taking them so long. She thought about sending someone else to fetch the guard cohort, then decided against it and took out a special memory, although using it required some essence to be spent. Right now, time was more important. The memory was called the Reaching Hand, and consisted of a scattering of finger bones. Each of the 4 cohorts under Morrow's command was in possession of a phalanx, and she held the 5th one. People who touched the ancient phalanxes could communicate with each other across small distances. Ironically, the reach of the Reaching Hand wasn't large. However, it possessed the unique quality of being shielded from most divination abilities, which was very valuable for the sort of mission they were currently on. Morrow gripped the bone and spoke, mentally connecting to the cohort that guarded the creature cage on another level of the factory. "Mont, where are you?" Soon, the leader of the cohort responded, her voice resonating in the vast production hall. "Sister Morrow, we are guarding the creature. Has something happened?" Morrow suddenly felt a bad premonition. "What do you mean? Have you not received my order?" Awakened Mont lingered. "I am sorry, sister. What order?" She gritted her teeth and started to say that she had sent 2, but then Morrow grew silent. The 2 Awakened she had sent to relay the order. Why were they not back yet? She had assumed that they had stayed with Mont to help move the cage, but why would they? She hesitated for a split second, then said calmly that it wasn't good. "Get the cage here right now." What had happened? Had the enemy already discovered their location and silently infiltrated the factory? How could they, without disturbing any of the wards she had placed on all the entrances? If the soldiers of Valor were already here? She glanced at her subordinates and barked, "Assemble into a battle formation. Prepare for an attack." A moment later, Morrow reached through the phalanx to the cohort that had gone forward to scout out the tunnel and told Rikas to return immediately. There was a short span of silence, and then she heard the familiar voice of awakened Rikas saying that they were coming. Concerned, the warriors of song swiftly assembled into a defensive formation. They stood near the entrance to the tunnel, looking nervously into the darkness of the production hall. The factory was silent. Soon, the silence was disturbed by a loud noise. With a screeching sound of rusted metal, a cargo elevator arrived. Its doors opened, revealing a massive cage of enchanted alloy. 7 awakened used all their strength to roll the cage forward. Morrow secretly let out a relieved sigh and remarked that at least the creature was secured. Now, they were only missing the 2 messengers and the cohort that had entered the tunnel. So Morrow asked Rikas how long it would be before he arrived. There was a stretch of silence again before he responded that they were coming. Morrow frowned. The familiar voice persisted. We are. Something was very, very wrong with it as the voice said that they were coming. The voice, it didn't come from the phalanx. Instead, it came directly from the dark entrance of the tunnel. She looked into the hole, seeing only a boundless expanse of shadows. Then, something rolled out of the darkness. It was the severed head of awakened Rikas. You should subscribe now so the next episode finds you here when the dust settles. Morrow stared at the severed head for a split moment, feeling cold terror creep into her heart. The clean cut, the hollow emptiness of his dead eyes, the dark entrance into the tunnel behind. Were they all dead? A whole cohort of experienced, battle-hardened awakened warriors of the great clan Song, wiped out in such a short span of time without making even a single sound. Had a human done that? No, that was impossible. Only Whispering Blade would have been capable of slaughtering them in such a manner. But then, Maddock would never lower himself to play with his prey. What kind of abomination was it? Then, how had the dogs of Valor allowed a monster like that to live freely under their city? Then Morrow scowled. Why was she scared? What was there to be scared of? Neither death nor nightmare creatures had ever frightened her before. Her people seemed to be shaken, too. So unbecoming of the elites of a great clan. A mental attack. The creature must have been employing some kind of beguilement. She growled. Activate the mental resistance enchantments. At the same time, she raised her hand and clicked her fingers, sending a devastating sonic shockwave into the tunnel. A deafening boom rolled through the production hall, and a fountain of stone dust and debris shot out of the dark entrance. The awakened of Song poured essence into the protective charms they carried. Instantly, it was as if they could breathe again. The memory of terror still lingered, though, gnawing at their willpower, there were 20 of them left. Gathered in a circular defensive formation that had no blind zones, with the massive cage placed in the center, Morrow stared in the direction of the tunnel tensely, wondering whether her attack caught the creature or not. When the echoes of the sonic boom died down and an unnerving silence settled over the production hall, she lingered for a moment, then gave the order to dismiss luminous memories. Trapped in a circle of light, they were too vulnerable, instead of relying on natural vision. The messengers of Song sacrificed a bit of essence to activate enchantments that granted them the ability to see in the dark. Instantly, the whole production hall was unveiled before them. Nothing could escape their gazes. But the hall was empty. There was nothing within its dark expanse except for old machines and shadows. Morrow raised her hand, brought her thumb and middle finger together, and then said loudly, "Show yourself, creature." There was a moment of silence, and then a moment more, and then the severed head laying in the dust beside her spoke, its mouth unmoving. "Creature, creature, creature." It spoke in Morrow's own voice. The awakened threw unsettled glances at the head of Rikas, which stared back at them with hollow eyes. What kind of a trick? Don't pay any attention to it. It's a distraction. She snarled, then looked away from the morbid visage of the speaking severed head and concentrated on the production hall, trying to predict where the attack would come from. The awakened followed her example, too, except for one. The man who had been the furthest from the entrance to the tunnel swayed slightly. Then, his head slid from his shoulders and fell to the floor, rolling through the dust as the body toppled behind it. In that short instant, when everyone had gotten distracted by the creature mimicking Morrow's voice, another awakened was mercilessly slain, and now, There were only 19 of them, damn it. Morrow clapped her hands together, unleashing the full force of her aspect. A destructive sonic shockwave spread like a ring from the formation of the awakened, obliterating a large swath of the production hall. The concrete floor cracked. The old machines were torn apart. The steel conveyor belts were ripped, and shreds of alloy flew away like jagged bullets. Nothing within the circle of destruction could have escaped unscathed. In the silence that followed, the severed head of Rika's spoke again, unperturbed. Pay. Ascended Morrow gritted her teeth, calmly analyzing the situation. Where was the enemy? What were its capabilities? There was something else beneath her calmness, though, a slither of fear, this time one that had nothing to do with an insidious outside influence. A moment later, two things happened. First, a loud metallic click came from somewhere within the defensive formation, from the massive cage that contained the enthralled abomination. Second, a section of the production hall's ceiling suddenly collapsed, and armored figures poured through the breach. A short time earlier, many levels above the production hall of the underground factory, Knight Amaran was standing in the middle of a wide corridor. He was surrounded by awakened of Valor, who were stealthily moving forward. A woman in light armor fashioned out of abomination leather was making a report. "Sir, we have dismantled the outer layers of the detection wards. The enemy should be right below us by now, but moving further unnoticed will be hard. The elevator shafts are especially problematic." He looked down, then nodded. "Try your best." His subordinate moved to return to her task, but at that moment, the floor trembled slightly. Amaran frowned. What? Why would the enemy abandon caution now? He raised his head to give an order, but at that moment, something flashed in the corner of his eye. Amaran swiftly turned, noticing the back of a small creature, some sort of a gremlin, scurrying into the darkness. His face darkened. "Our presence has been discovered." There was another tremor, this one much stronger than the first. The worms had to be trying to collapse the wall of a tunnel in a hurry, hoping to escape. If so, he was going to have to disappoint them. Amaran had been planning to proceed further down quietly, even if it took more time. But now that such an approach was off the table, there was a need to accelerate things. There was a sword on his belt, and a war hammer on his back. Unsheathing the sword and pulling the hammer from its loop, Amaran bellowed, "Warriors of Valor, with me." Then he called upon his aspect and slammed the war hammer into the floor. A wave of crushing force traveled downward, piercing through multiple levels of the underground factory and opening a ravaged path to the main production hall. Without a moment of hesitation, Knight Amaran grinned and jumped down into the dark breach. Death to the enemy. Let no one escape. Some of his warriors were going to use flight memories to follow. Others would rappel down, but Amaran himself had no need for these measures. He simply plummeted through the breach, falling into the darkness like a meteor of steel. Reaching the main production hall, he thrust his sword forward. Invisible force flowed off the blade, forming a brittle field below him. A series of them, actually, each as thin as a sheet of paper. Breaking through these invisible panes of force allowed Amaran to slow his fall. He landed on the floor in a roll and jumped to his feet a split second later, ready to attack and carve out a path for his men to follow. If everything went right, the enemy would have been surprised by the collapsing ceiling and the sudden arrival of a Valor Knight. Even if their shock didn't last long, a few seconds would be enough. But he wasn't given a few seconds. Nothing went right from the start. As soon as Amaran and the first of his warriors landed, they were greeted by a devastating sonic boom. He felt a powerful shockwave travel through his body, almost strong enough to cause his organs to burst. Luckily, he was resilient enough to withstand it. The same couldn't be said for the awakened behind him. With pained screams, they dropped down, blood flowing from every orifice on their bodies, dead. It was as though the enemy had been waiting in a battle formation, ready to defend themselves. How dare you? As more and more armored awakened poured through the breach, Amaran roared and dashed forward. There was something strange, though, at the last moment before his lunge. It was as if a drop of blood fell on his helmet from somewhere above. He didn't pay it any attention. In front of him was a loose circle of awakened protecting something that resembled a large alloy crate. There was some kind of abominable monster inside, no doubt. Bringing a nightmare creature inside a human city was just what the witch, Beastmaster, would do, and allowing the crate to be smuggled into the city despite knowing about its contents was exactly what Valor would do, if it meant leaving the assassins no chance to escape. Amaran's gaze quickly found the leader of the song infiltration team, a striking woman whose beauty could neither be hidden by unassuming civilian clothes nor blemished by an ugly scar running across her face. His eyes narrowed slightly as he whispered the name Morrow. There weren't that many masters in the world, and even fewer served the great clans directly, of course. Amaran knew her. The scarred woman was a powerful opponent, not as powerful as he was, of course. Their eyes met, and before she could click her fingers, Amaran struck with both his sword and his hammer, sending two horizontal waves of force flying forward, one cutting, the other crushing. The waves collided with a sonic shockwave in the middle of the hall, producing a roaring explosion. Bits of concrete shot outward like shrapnel. It was then that his mind registered a few incongruities in the scene before him. First of all, the entrance to the tunnel had already been revealed. However, the enemy didn't appear to be in a hurry to enter it, as if wary of the darkness beyond. Secondly, the main production hall was in a sorry state even before the explosion, seemingly ravaged by Morrow's powers. There were also too few awakened in her formation, no more than 20. 4 full cohorts of song infiltrators had crossed the city gate checkpoint. So what happened to the rest of them? And lastly, there was a gruesomely beheaded body on the floor in front of Song's warriors, one of their own. Just what the hell was going on? There was something else, too. Amaran wondered if it was an archer, for a moment, just before the waves of force collided and a cloud of dust obscured the view. Amaran thought that he had noticed something, a vague silhouette that moved on top of the massive cage, dissolving into darkness, lowering his head to protect the slit of his helmet's visor. He burst through the cloud of dust and raised his sword. No matter what tricks the enemy had in store, he was going to cut them all down. Especially now that he knew that the numbers were even more on their side than expected. Knight Amaran had no doubt. The main priorities are Morrow and the caged creature. Morrow silently cursed, so it was Valor all along. It seemed that they had walked into a trap. The servants of the King of Swords had turned out to be more cunning than expected. Someone had been waiting in the tunnel all along, and now, the cavalry had arrived to finish the job who had been compromised. It had to be the thrall responsible for clearing the path to the inner city, but it didn't matter now. The enemy blundered in their attack, maybe because she had decided to accelerate the plan. The invisible assassin had revealed their presence too early, and instead of being surprised by the sudden breach of the production hall, the messengers of song were ready for it, which was why Morrow managed to slay several of Valor's awakened the moment they landed on the floor. Not their leader, though, a giant of a man wearing heavy armor and wielding both a sword and a war hammer. Her heart grew slightly cold as she recognized Knight Amaran, even among the Knights of Valor. This zealot was known for his power and ruthlessness. He was a bit too straight of a tool, though, a man blessed with incredible strength, but very little imagination. A vicious smile appeared on Morrow's face. "I'll have a chance to bring back a fine trophy, then." She sent a sonic shockwave to prevent the knight from decimating the formation of Songs awakened, then swiftly looked at the breach. Just how many soldiers had Amaran brought to kill them? It was strange. There weren't nearly as many as she would have expected. 1 cohort, 2, 3, 4, and that was it. If Valor knew in advance about the infiltration team, why would they only send that many? And there was something else. Instead of more cohorts of awakened, streams of blood flowed from the breach, crimson drops falling like rain. The soldiers of Valor who had already landed seemed shaken because of that. Morrow hesitated. What's the meaning of this? Her hesitation only lasted a split second. However, then, there was no more time to think. Amaran lunged forward, calling upon his aspect and bringing down an avalanche of destructive force upon the formation of the Song infiltrators. 2 waves of crushing power rolled forward from his weapons, only to shatter against the invisible bulwark of a sonic boom. The concrete floor was shattered as the whole factory trembled. A moment later, a swift silhouette shot toward him from the cloud of dust. Morrow, her calm eyes full of cold, murderous intent. Her shabby civilian clothes were torn, revealing glimpses of a slender, enchanted armor hidden beneath. In her hand, there was a narrow blade that seemed too fragile to be used in actual combat. Amaran raised his sword, batting the blade away. At the same time, his hammer flew forward, the spike protruding from its top aimed precisely at the enemy's unprotected throat. However, as soon as his sword met the steel of Morrow's weapon, there was a melodious ring. That ring suddenly magnified, crashing into him like a stone wall, grimacing from pain piercing his ears. The Knight of Valor was thrown back. He rolled over his shoulder, catching a glimpse of his warriors. They were advancing, ready to clash with the Awaken of Clan Song, even though Amaran only saw them for a tiny sliver of a second. He noticed two things. First, the blood spilling from the breach in the roof of the main production hall. Second, the fact that only 4 of the 6 cohorts seemed to have made it down. Wrath ignited in his heart as he called them treacherous worms. One of Morrow's cohorts was missing, and now 2 of his own had failed to descend. It wasn't hard to understand what had most likely happened. The damned witch must have sent some of her people to ambush the warriors of Valor on the upper levels of the factory, to sacrifice their lives so that the rest could escape. A cunning maneuver, albeit a fruitless one. It was of no use. Even with the missing cohort buying the infiltrators time with their blood, the force of Song was still hopelessly outmatched. Morrow was desperate, and wouldn't she be? The executioner she faced was none other than Amaran. The sword of Valor was inescapable. These thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant, landing on his feet. Amaran calmly looked up and saw the slender blade falling on his head. His helmet was probably strong enough to withstand the sharp edge, but it was forged out of the best of Valor's steel. Should the strike land, there would be a ringing, and that ringing would be turned into another sonic explosion by the enemy. Instead of the helmet, the blade struck a shield of invisible force that appeared in the air above Amaran. He also wrapped both his weapons with thin layers of force. He was a fast learner. After all, after that first strike, Morrow would find it hard to turn the sound of clashing blades against him. As the 2 masters collided with each other in a lethal battle, so did their soldiers. The Awakened of Valor descended on the formation of the infiltrators like a steel tide, threatening to overwhelm it in an instant. Unfortunately for them, the Awakened of Song weren't so easily overwhelmed. Amaran cursed. Morrow saw one of her soldiers fall to the ground in a fountain of blood. His armor was shattered, and the wretched warrior of Valor who had killed him was already moving to attack another. But then, the servant of the King of Swords fell too. His back tore open. She felt wicked joy. It was strange, though. Morrow missed which of her people had avenged their brother. It must have been a ranged attack, since no one was close enough to deliver a melee strike. There, at the edge of the formation, there was only emptiness and darkness. A good shot, then Morrow hummed, and her humming was picked up by the rest of the song's messengers. Bright smiles bloomed on their faces. The humming wasn't an expression of some awakened power or a harbinger of a devastating sonic attack. It was simply their song, a song of slaughter. She noted that the brute had a tough shell, a song of slaughter. She was entangled in a fierce fight with Knight Amaran, preventing him from devastating the formation. Of course, the dog was also preventing her from massacring the attacking Awakened. For now, Amaran was powerful, skilled, and intelligent, but he was also arrogant and rigid. Morrow had already landed 6 blows on his armor. The problem was that the armor was too tough. It had to be a transcendent memory created by the best forgemasters of Clan Valor, since even her blade, bestowed by the Queen herself, was powerless against its enchanted steel. Even more frustratingly, the knight was using his aspect to wrap himself in a thin layer of protective force, stifling all sounds that could have resulted from their clash. Still, it was just a matter of time before he made a mistake. Morrow was confident. Just a dozen seconds later, however, her confidence waned, not because she felt pressured by Amaran, and she did, of course. A Knight of Valor wasn't an enemy to be taken lightly. No, it was because Morrow was suddenly unsure of how much time she had left, because their soldiers were dying too quickly. All of them were the absolute elites of the awakened world. so their battle was unsurprisingly intense and bloody. The whole factory was quaking and convulsing from the magnitude of the unleashed violence, as if on the verge of collapsing. Before it did, they would have to escape to the streets. And yet, the battle was somehow too bloody and too lethal. There were too many corpses on the ground already, especially at the edges of the formation, where the fighting was supposed to be less intense. Morrow remembered that the assassin Amarin had sent ahead of the main force was still here, somewhere. In the production hall, that could have been an explanation, if not for the fact that there were more of Valor warriors dying than that of Song. Something strange was going on. Morrow deflected a glancing blow from Amarin's sword and evaded the beak of the war hammer, pushing forward to deliver a strike of her own. I am missing something. Something isn't right. Even though she was suppressing the valiant knight, and even though her soldiers were seemingly prevailing against the servants of Valor. A cold, unsettling feeling slowly found its way into Morrow's heart. Knight Amarin was forceful and oppressive, his every move bringing with it a promise of death, and yet neither his sword nor his hammer could reach her. Not even his insidious aspect was enough to bring Morrow down. She had slain nightmare creatures more dangerous than this ascended warrior. She had slain more dangerous humans, too. Amarin's warriors were valiant and skilled, each at the very pinnacle of what an awakened could achieve. Numbers were on their side, and yet, for each messenger of Song that fell, 2 of Valor's dogs died. Their trap had turned out to be strangely clumsy and inefficient. By now, Morrow knew that there was a possibility of victory. Unless the enemy received reinforcements soon, they would be able to escape and carry out the plan, however. She was missing something, which was why Morrow allowed her attention to wander. Being distracted in a fight against someone like Amarin was tantamount to suicide, but she did so nevertheless. Her blade failed to reach the knight's armor again. Her body received several ghastly wounds because of her inattention. More and more awakened died around them, but Morrow coldly continued to observe. And then, she saw it, a warrior of Valor falling down with a pained scream. Blood streaming from his torn neck, only there had been no one near to tear it. It was subtle and almost unnoticeable in the havoc of the battle, but she saw it clearly. The nearest of her soldiers was too busy defending against 2 powerful awakened. It couldn't have been a ranged attack, either. The angle was all wrong. It was as if darkness itself reached forth and sliced the man's throat open with sharp claws. Morrow's eyes darted to the opposite side of the formation, just in time to see one of Song's awakened die. His hand suddenly bloomed with blood, and so the attacking soldier of Valor received a chance to plunge her weapon into the slit of his visor. The hand of her subordinate had been severed completely. A clean, fierce cut that sliced through armor, flesh, and bone as if not meeting any resistance. Only the weapon that had killed her man was a spear. There was no way it could deliver a cut like that. Morrow suddenly felt cold. There's another here. There was something, insidious and sinister moving unseen through the darkness, slaughtering the men of both Valor and Song indiscriminately, silently, inescapably. The image of a severed head rolling from the dark entrance of the tunnel suddenly surfaced in her mind. Morrow's blood turned to ice. Who was it? What was it? What had they unleashed from that darkness? Shaking these infantile thoughts, she snarled, "Does it matter?" It didn't. Whatever it was, she would destroy it, just like she was going to destroy these wretched minions of the King of Swords. Morrow glanced at Amarin, who was continuing to rain devastating blows on her. Blind to what was going on, she called him a fool. No matter the cost, the plan had to be carried out. She had to salvage what little could be salvaged from this unforeseen situation. Morrow hesitated for a moment, then pretended to be pushed back by one of his strikes and momentarily lose her balance. Amarin rushed forward like a frenzied dog, intending to capitalize on the opening. His hammer fell down and landed on her shoulder. In a flash of pain, Morrow heard her bones shatter. But it didn't matter, because in that instant, she was practically face to face with the hateful brute. Morrow opened her mouth and shrieked as her essence burned. A deafening wail shook the underground factory. Clutching his ears, an irrational gesture, considering that they were covered by the steel of his helmet, Amarin fell to the ground and writhed in pain. His whole world was pain, It was as though a white-hot screwdriver was being driven into his brain, mercilessly destroying every thought. He felt blood streaming from his ears. He knew that Morrow wouldn't let the chance to finish him off go. Shaking off the agony, Amarin gritted his teeth and moved. He wondered what that woman was. A split second later, the tip of a narrow blade was almost at his throat. He raised a hand and grabbed it with an armored gauntlet. Too slow, witch. He couldn't even hear his own voice through the ringing in his ears. Amarin had managed to stop the fatal strike from killing him, but the position he was in still promised nothing good. He was kneeling and dazed, while the enemy was free to attack however she wished. But strangely, Morrow didn't attack. Instead, she let go of her blade and dashed back, toward the formation of her awakened. There was blood flowing from her mouth. He looked in that direction. The diabolical whale Morrow had unleashed devastated the whole production hall. There were slabs of concrete falling from above. What little remained of old machinery had been turned into piles of scrap. The floor had become uneven and full of deep cracks. The awakened on both sides fared no better. Many were dead. On both sides. Their mouths were opened in silent screams. Their faces turned into gruesome paintings of blood by the power of the wicked attack. Even those who wielded memories meant to protect against just this kind of threat didn't escape unscathed. What the hell is she trying to? Amarin didn't know, but he knew that he had to stop the ruthless witch from accomplishing whatever it was she was planning. He lunged forward, aiming to catch up to Morrow. Luckily, there wasn't much distance between them, and the Ascended of Song was severely wounded. That last blow he had delivered made a mess of her right shoulder and clavicle. It was then that Amarin saw it, in the direction where Morrow was running, behind the decimated line of Song's defensive formation. Massive alloy container that held an enthralled nightmare creature inside. His pupils narrowed as he said he saw. Amarin understood what Morrow wanted to achieve. She must have abandoned all hope of delivering the abomination to the inner city and wanted to unleash it right here and now. Sadly for her, he wouldn't give her that chance. He raised his sword, ready to send a wave of force at the back of the escaping woman. But then, a vague silhouette suddenly lunged at him from the side. Reacting on instinct, Amarin lashed out with his hammer. The attacker dove beneath it and delivered a strike with a sharp, narrow stiletto. Pathetic. One of Song's worms must have already recovered enough to attack. The Knight of Valor simply moved his arm, shielding those seams of his armor that protected vital organs. All the attacker could do was drive his stiletto between the rerebrace and the counter, and even then just by a centimeter or two, delivering an insignificant wound to his elbow. The next moment, Amarin counterattacked, forcing the unclear figure to stagger away. The attacker seemed to dissolve into darkness, as if she had never existed at all. Amarin growled and called him a coward. Amarin growled and continued his pursuit. What had that cowardly attack achieved? Nothing. Morrow would still not escape. He prepared to deliver another strike, but then suddenly swayed. He felt weak, confused, and suddenly unsettled. Amarin glanced at his elbow, where a few drops of blood seeped from beneath the impregnable plates of his armor. The blood. Why did it seem almost black? The knight's eyes widened slightly as he wondered if it was poison. A few moments later, jumping over the corpses of her people, Morrow reached the containment cage. She groaned, spitting out a mouthful of blood, and used the only hand she could move to strike at the seal. There was no complicated procedure to opening the cage. The key to its magical lock was simple. It was blood, blood of Song. Morrow's fist left a bloody imprint on the plate of the seal, and it seemed to ignite, burning away in an instant. The clasps holding the cage closed fell away, and it burst open. Inside was a creature so ghastly and revolting that anyone would have been terrified to see it. But Morrow only smiled. She grinned, revealing bloodied teeth. Go, slaughter everyone who's not Song. To the surface. The creature unfolded from within the cage and moved, following her command. But what was that? Why was the abomination bleeding? There were several thin, shallow cuts on its gray hide, seemingly delivered by a blade so sharp as to be perfect. And its many eyes, why were they not full of hollow obedience? Instead, they were brimming with something else. Madness, a boundless, murderous madness, and hunger. The creature escaped its cage. It was a revolting thing, a towering mass of gray flesh with 100 nimble limbs and a scattering of huge, eerily human-like eyes, all of them burned with delirious frenzy. Its enormous body continued to unfold, occupying much more space on the outside of the container than there had been on the inside. Its limbs moved, sharp claws shooting in all directions. Morrow might have been able to resist the terrifying abomination if she had been prepared, but she wasn't. Her body had been battered and wounded, and her mind was momentarily frozen by the visage of the creature that had somehow escaped its enthrallment. She was slow to react by only a split second, but that was all it took. Her figure disappeared in a tide of slithering gray limbs, and just like that, an Ascended of the great clan song had been killed. Amarin watched her die with an incredulous expression. Such irony! The witch had been slain by her own pet abomination. The death of a powerful enemy should have brought him joy, but he felt a grim sense of dread instead. After all, the creature had to be dealt with, and Amarin, despite his pride and strength, wasn't confident in his chances. He would have been a fool not to recognize the revolting monstrosity for what it was. A corrupted and of a high class from the looks of it, a devil, no, worse than that, a tyrant. These crazy wretches, they smuggled a corrupted tyrant into a human city. They were planning to unleash that thing within a siege capital's walls. Of course, Amarin himself was among the people who had knowingly allowed the corrupted tyrant to be smuggled into a human city, because it suited their goals. The hypocrisy of his contempt didn't escape him, but he brushed it off. There was no time to ponder such matters, because the tyrant was starting to move. There were still a couple dozen awakened left alive in the ruined production hall, all dazed by Morrow's dreadful wail. Some of them belonged to Clan Valor, and some of them belonged to Clan Song. However, at the moment, their allegiance didn't matter. The abomination didn't care about whom they served. After all, gray limbs shot through the air, grabbing several of the awakened that were closest to the broken cage. Blood spilled to the ground. Amarin was already moving. Regroup. Concentrate your attacks on the monster. He gritted his teeth, feeling the toxin sap his speed and strength. What kind of treacherous blade had that awakened assassin used? A master like Amarin wasn't easy to poison, and yet he could feel a sickening weakness spreading through his body. Fighting through that weakness, he growled and threw his hammer with all the might of an ascended knight. The war hammer spun as it flew toward the tyrant with the speed of a bullet, and as if a path had been opened by its passage. A furious torrent of invisible force followed. The hammer and the torrent of force struck the massive body of the shambling horror with such fury that a sudden explosion rang out. A full-power strike from Amarin was destructive enough to shatter the gates of a citadel. The tyrant, however, was simply thrown back. The bodies of the awakened it had grabbed fell to the ground. But then, they slowly stood up. Only they didn't look like humans anymore. There was a wicked, alien coldness hiding in their eyes, and ghostly black strings extending from their backs toward the limbs of the gray abomination. The faces of the risen corpses twisted, and they awkwardly lunged toward the nearest awakened. More blood spilled. Amarin cursed. A puppeteer. Before, he hadn't been too worried about the creature escaping from the factory and reaching the industrial zone above. That was within the parameters of the mission. Now, however, allowing the tyrant access to crowds of refugees was the same as gifting it an army. That he couldn't allow. The creature had to be destroyed now, before it received an opportunity to create a legion of flesh puppets. In fact, the tyrant had to know that there were millions of souls to be reaped right above. Intelligent as these creatures were, it should have been trying to escape a dangerous enemy like Amarin and reach the surface, where there was an unlimited supply of bodies for it to turn. But, for some reason, the appalling abomination seemed hellbent on slaying every human in the main production hall of the underground factory first. Amarin wasn't going to complain. Attack, you wretches! His bellow rolled through the hall, pushing the awakened into action. The warriors of Valor followed the order without hesitation. While the surviving worms of song seemed confused about what to do, some hesitantly joined the attack on the tyrant. Some tried to attack fellow humans despite the situation. Those were cut down first. Some even tried to escape. The cowards didn't make it far. Amarin was too busy to notice who had killed them. but none managed to disappear into the dark mouth of the tunnel. The wall of gray flesh and countless limbs surged at the rest of them. I've to destroy it. In his heart, Amarin knew that a corrupted tyrant wasn't an enemy he could hope to slay alone, especially not poisoned and drained by his fight against the cursed witch, Morrow. But this one was strangely weak. Maybe it was weakened by being locked in the enchanted cage for so long, or maybe it was simply the type of tyrant whose power lay in a legion of minions. It was also rabid and crazed. Almost. Unintelligent, fighting the creature was no different from fighting a powerful monster, if not for the puppets it could create. So there was a chance. No matter how small, the awakened died, only to be turned into puppets. The puppets were destroyed in turn. The shambling horror of gray flesh received numerous wounds. Many of its long limbs were crushed or severed. The factory seemed to be coming undone. I will destroy it. Even when the last of the awakened under his command died, Amarin persisted. His sword flashed over and over again, and waves of invisible force crashed into the massive body of the creature in a constant stream. His lungs were burning, and his veins were full of poison. His essence was running dry, but he refused to fail the mission. He had to prevail. And then, miraculously, Amarin did. The puppets that were reaching out to grab him suddenly swayed, and then fell down. The towering, desiccated mass of gray flesh convulsed and lifelessly sprawled on the cracked floor. The spell spoke into his ears. He swayed, struggling to believe in what he saw, and fell to one knee. He was utterly spent and barely able to move. And yet, he had won. Knight Amarin drew in a hoarse breath. I won. In the silence that followed, a cold voice suddenly resounded from behind him.
Did you?
He flinched and turned around, glancing up. Above him stood a dark apparition, a fiend in fearsome black armor, wearing a demonic mask that was crowned by 3 twisting horns. In the mask's eyes, there was nothing but darkness. What? Whose? The mask moved slightly, and the 2 pools of darkness stared directly into Amarin's soul, making him shudder. The apparition spoke.
I guess you did.
A moment later, a cold blade slid silently into the slit of Amarin's visor, ending his life.
You've slain an ascended human, Amarin. Your shadow grows stronger.
Sunny stood for a moment above the knight's corpse, waiting for the enchanted armor to dissipate into a whirlwind of crimson sparks. Then, he used shadows to turn his gauntlet into a fearsome claw and struck down a few times. It wasn't in his habit to mutilate the bodies of his enemies, but he had to mask the initial blade wound that had killed the fearsome master. With that, his task here was finished. Sunny tilted his head and thought with a bit of detachment.
That went more smoothly than I had expected.
Wiping out 10 cohorts of elite awakened and 2 legacy masters had turned out to be easier than he would have thought. A force like that, if Sunny hadn't intervened, their battle would inevitably spill out into the streets above. No matter how sudden Valor's ambush was, the assassins of Song weren't pushovers, especially their leader. They would have retreated and eventually made their way to the surface, but he had prevented that. Sunny became aware of the infiltration team's location thanks to the gloomy shadow, which had followed them all the way back to this siege capital from Clan Song's territory after locating the assassins. Finding the soldiers of Valor wasn't hard. He just had to send his other shadows to scour the surrounding area. Then, what he needed to do was make sure that the 2 forces annihilated each other completely and with no collateral damage. Sadly, the infiltrators moved earlier than expected, almost giving Knight Amarin and his soldiers a slip. Sunny had to stall them a little, so he silently killed the 2 messengers the Ascended of Song. He thought her name was Morrow, sent to retrieve the cohort guarding the cage. Then, using Shadow Step to move unseen, he entered the tunnel and waited there until the scouts arrived. That was probably the hardest part of the entire mission. Killing 7 powerful awakened before they could make a sound wasn't easy, even for him. He would have summoned Saint, but she couldn't share the benefits of wearing Weaver's mask, so Sunny ended up using Shadow Manifestation to strike simultaneously at all 7. He then pushed the extraordinary rock into the mouth of the leader of the cohort and threw the severed head back into the production hall to create a distraction. A shaken enemy was easier to deal with, so Sunny wasn't above using a bit of theatrics, while everybody was staring at the talking head. Sunny killed one more assassin and swiftly dissolved into the shadows. By then, the force of Valor was drawing closer. They were still not fast enough for his taste, though, so he used Imp to hurry the bastards along. It was then that Morrow decided to blast half of the production hall with a radial sonic attack. Luckily, Sunny was already somewhere where the shockwave couldn't reach. When Knight Amaran broke through the roof and launched an assault on the immobilized infiltrators. Sunny was actually inside the cage containing a damn corrupted tyrant, slashing the creature with the sin of solace to drive it insane. That was another experience he would prefer to never relive. From the cage, he stepped through the shadow to appear in the corridors above. The force sent by Valor was a bit too strong, especially now that he had dispatched some of the song's assassins. He had to equalize the odds a little to make it easier to kill them all. Sunny waited until most of Amaran's awakened jumped into the hole in the floor, and then attacked the last dozen or so that remained in the corridor, with the element of surprise on his side and no more need to remain absolutely quiet. Dispatching them wasn't too hard. By the time he was finished with the bloody task, the battle between Valor and Song was in full swing. However, they weren't killing each other well enough. Morrow could still push the attackers back and pull out her forces. So, Sunny moved stealthily around the battlefield, remaining in the form of an incorporeal shadow and using shadow manifestation to pick off awakened from both sides. He made sure to obfuscate his interference as much as possible, of course, and just like he had been doing from the very start, he killed the awakened of Song with blades and the awakened of Valor with claws. Everything went more or less exactly as planned. Sunny only had to expose himself once. To slow down Amaran and let Morrow open the cage, he used the bitter cusp to smear black venom on the blade of the Moonlight Shard. Since dealing with the heavily armored knight wasn't easy, he also wanted to give the tyrant more of a shot. The creature was strong, but without any minions and with its mind shattered by the sin of solace, there was a chance that it wouldn't be able to give the kind of fight Sunny needed it to give. In order to make all the corpses with claw marks on their bodies look believable, the tyrant escaped and slaughtered those awakened that remained alive. Sunny cut down those who tried to escape and secretly delivered the abomination a few severe wounds, making sure to give Amaran enough time to ravage the body of the tyrant with his aspect. And when all was said and done, he finished off the mighty knight with his own hand. The despicable zealot actually thought that he had won, while in reality, his defeat was meticulously orchestrated from the very start. Now, silence settled over the ruined production hall. 10 cohorts of awakened humans were dead. None managed to escape into the streets of the city. No refugee was swallowed by their empty feud. The warriors of Song had sword wounds on their bodies, while the warriors of Valor were seemingly killed by sharp claws. The massive abomination was turned to paste by Amaran's aspect. The picture of what had happened here was clear. The two forces obliterated each other, with the tyrant succumbing to the wounds delivered by the valiant knight. Did Sunny feel guilty about bringing these awakened to their deaths? He had just murdered 70 people, after all, much more than he had in his entire life, not counting those from the nightmares. Did it matter that the 70 people he murdered were themselves murderers? Not really, and he didn't really care, either. Unlike the millions of people who had perished in Falcon Scott, they got what they deserved. If there was one thing Sunny regretted, it was that Amaran actually managed to land the last strike on the tyrant. Somehow, that was a frustrating loss, throwing one last glance at the scene of carnage. Sunny shook his head in dejection and disappeared into the shadows, as if he had never been here at all. A ravaged underground hall, split concrete, old machines turned into piles of scrap, broken walls, deep darkness chased away by the bright light of electric floodlights, the stench of blood permeating the air, and bodies, of course, scattered on the cracked floor, dozens of them, all bearing terrible wounds, bodies of the Awaken of Valor, the Awaken of Song, and one more, a ghastly hill of gray flesh that had been a nightmare creature before. Morgan studied the scene of slaughter with a neutral expression as she walked among the corpses. She would linger for a few moments near one of the corpses, then indifferently move on to the next. Her vermilion eyes were cold. St. Gilead, the summer night, was more expressive. He was kneeling in front of one of the bodies with a mournful expression on his gallant, handsome face. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips. Morgan turned around and looked at the transcendent, saying Amaran.
I am sorry, Sir Gilead. I forgot that the two of you were once members of the same cohort. Please accept my condolences.
Her voice didn't seem too regretful, though Summer Night looked down. Sometimes I forget. She raised an eyebrow and asked what. The saint lingered for a few moments, then offered her a calm gaze. How much I loathe you and your family. Morgan smiled slightly and looked away.
Well, what can I say? We are a loathsome bunch.
With that, she used her armored boot to turn one of the bodies over and asked if it made sense to him. Summer Night stood up with a sigh and walked over. The result is outside expectations, but the sequence of events seems clear. We severely underestimated the opposition. By all accounts, Amarin should have been able to achieve a clean victory, but the presence of a corrupted tyrant changed things. Our estimation of Beastmaster's power needs to be adjusted. Still, he slayed the beast, even if the price was his life. Morgan shook her head.
It seems clear, Rom.
Her gaze was locked on the fatal sword wound that had killed the awakened in front of her. Morgan remained motionless for a few moments. She remarked on what a beautiful cut it was, seemingly losing interest in the corpse. She turned away and called out to one of the specialists that had been casing the scene. The man walked over and bowed, then delivered a preliminary report. His conclusions were in line with what St. Gilead had said. Morgan stared at him bleakly and asked if the diviners had discovered anything. The investigator looked away in embarrassment and said that there was nothing. My lady, a slight frown appeared on her face.
So you're telling me that 6 cohorts of Valor's best, armed and armored with forged memories, lost to 4 cohorts of Song infiltrators, and that night Amarin slayed a corrupted tyrant alone?
The man lowered his head. That's what the evidence tells, my lady. Morgan scoffed. She remained silent for a while, then turned and addressed a delicate young woman who was standing silently above a severed head.
What about you, Kasha? Do you see something?
The young woman shifted slightly and answered in a calm tone that she saw nothing. Morgan tilted her head.
Are you telling me that you don't see anything, or that you see nothing?
Summer Night frowned, thinking that the princess was mocking the blind girl. The young woman, meanwhile, simply nodded. Morgan grinned.
Heureusely.
She turned to the saint and pierced him with an amused look.
See, Sir Gilead, at least someone isn't useless here.
Then her expression darkened. Morgan looked at the corpse laying at her feet once again and frowned. After a few moments of silence, she mumbled.
Was it the House of Night? No, unlikely. That cut, just who could have?
Sonny took a step back and bent over, breathing heavily. By his side, Cassie swayed, struggling to catch her balance after her rapier was shattered by Morgan's attack. Today, the princess had decided to face the two of them at the same time. The spar was an especially grueling one. They gave a good fight, cooperating with each other so flawlessly that it almost seemed as if they shared one mind, but in the end, the princess mercilessly drove them both back. She seemed possessed, attacking with such power and ferocity that Sonny found it almost unnecessary to downplay his abilities. He pretended to be utterly exhausted. There was little need to pretend, really, and lowered his sword.
That was a good fight, Lady Morgan.
She glanced at her own blade, which was nicked all over and utterly ruined, then threw it aside with frustration. After catching his breath for a couple of seconds, he slowly straightened and glanced at her with a complicated expression. She said that he had done well, too.
But are you troubled by something? Or your technique seemed a bit distracted today?
Morgan stared at him for a few moments, her face turning cold. Eventually, she said with a hint of discontent in her voice.
That's not something for a person like you to concern yourself with, or come to think of it, I won't need your services in the next few days. Master's sunless, so make yourself scarce.
Just what he wanted. Sonny put on a suitably alarmed expression and lowered his gaze. He said, "As you wish, my lady." She lingered for a few moments, then scoffed and left. Sonny and Cassie were left alone in the training room. It had been 2 days since the slaughter in the abandoned factory. Morgan seemed to be suspicious that something irregular had taken place in the underground production hall, but not a drop of that suspicion was directed at Sonny. He had hidden his traces well, and no one within Valor could ever imagine that someone like him was capable of wiping out 10 cohorts of Awakened from the great clans, let alone doing it with such insidious and flawless, almost diabolical precision. As for Sonny, he was effortlessly playing the role of someone who had no clue about what had happened. Glancing at Cassie, he shrugged and asked what was up with her. The blind girl turned her head to face him, then remained silent for a while. Eventually, she said,
"You don't have to worry."
Sonny frowned.
What was that supposed to mean?
Did Cassie know something? If anyone would, it was her. He shook his head, then dragged his tired body across the room to place the training sword back into its stand. If Cassie knew, she would keep silent, but in any case, Morgan's polite suggestion to disappear for a few days was very timely, no matter how confident he was that he had avoided all suspicion. It was best not to parade in front of emissaries of Valor for a while, and, to be honest, Sonny was long overdue for a little vacation. Placing the sword down, he looked at Cassie and asked,
Hey, about that favor I asked. How about we go to the dream realm for a little while? I seem to be free all of a sudden.
The blind girl smiled slightly.
"Sure, no problem."
She carefully placed her broken rapier on the floor and added,
"I already told Nephis that she's free too."
Sonny froze for a moment, then made a face. The Ivory Island was as peaceful and idyllic as ever. Sonny remained motionless for a few moments, enjoying the cool breeze and the view of the boundless expanse of the blue sky. He cursed the oracles. Come to think of it, it was rare to find such a tranquil haven in the dream realm. Even the sanctuary, which was beautiful and serene in its own way, never felt safe. There was always the possibility of an attack. After all, what protected the sanctuary was people. And people weren't omnipotent. The Crushing was a much more reliable guardian. The three of them, Sonny, Nephis, and Cassie, had just arrived from the waking world. Sonny was wearing the Shroud of Dusk, since that was his best armor memory. The other two, however, had slighted their combat armor in favor of lighter garments. Cassie was wearing the familiar tunic and sea wave cloak, while Nephis was in something that he recognized as the black underlayer of the Starlight Legion armor. Sonny still couldn't believe that a mere awakened memory of the second tier had survived years of wandering through the dream realm and the second nightmare. But, in any way, the three of them looked like people ready for a vacation. They weren't the only ones either.
What's this?
Sonny glanced toward the entrance to the tower, where two figures were waiting for them. Effie was sitting on the ground, enjoying a veritable mountain of snacks. Her transcendent armor was nowhere to be seen, leaving a lot of olive skin exposed to the sun and the wind. There was a relaxed, extremely pleased expression on her face. Kai was standing nearby, wearing his military uniform. He was looking at the dragon bones that surround the ivory tower with a neutral expression on his handsome, slightly melancholic face, noticing the new arrivals. Effie happily waved a hand and shouted that they were there. Sonny walked over, both pleased and confused to see the two of them.
I see that you're here, but why are you here?
Kai turned around and smiled slightly.
Hey, our companies have spent a lot of time on the city walls recently, so we were rotated out of active duty for a couple of weeks. We're on leave.
Effie nodded.
Yeah, so when Cassie offered to go on a field trip, we had nothing better to do, plus, we're curious to revisit a few places, too.
Sonny gave the blind girl a suspicious look. He was sure that he only decided to spend some time on the chained island this morning. When the hell had she found time to invite Effie and Kai? Noticing his gaze, Cassie simply shrugged. Sonny said, well, whatever. He was glad to see them anyway.
I seem good then, but I wouldn't call it a field trip. I expect to fight at least one creepy abomination this week, so don't get too relaxed.
Effie dismissively waved a greasy hand in the air.
Yeah, that abomination, though, is it edible?
He stared at her bleakly.
I am not sure.
She grinned,
No problem, we'll just have to find out then.
shaking his head. Sunny turned away and glanced at the graceful silhouette of the flying ship that rested on the water not too far away, since Cassie was the one who knew how to control it. He addressed the next question to her.
Let's not waste any time. Where to first, Captain?
He had already shared the places he wanted to visit with the blind girl, so she was in charge of plotting the course. Cassie smiled.
The first stop is right beneath us. Actually, it wasn't on your list, but I wanted to study the runes there, just a few hours.
Sunny shrugged. He had nothing against others adding more locations to the list. They were going to be helping him out with his goals, so it was only fair, he said. Let's go, then, together. The 5 of them headed toward the lake and boarded the ship. Cassie entered the runic circle at the stern, saturating it with her soul essence as she gently took the steering oars. The leaves of the sacred tree growing around the mast of the flying vessel rustled gently as it lifted off the lake's surface and soared into the sky. There were no sailor dolls on the deck, and no fire keepers to replace them. The sails were lowered, so their speed wasn't what it could have been. Still, for a simple descent, that was enough. The ancient ship moved past the edge of the ivory island and tilted down, diving into the sea of clouds, surrounded by white mist. Sunny suddenly thought about something and turned to Cassie.
Well, have you named it, or the ship?
She lingered for a few moments.
No, I wasn't sure if I had the right. It had to have had a name before, after all. What did Noctis call it? Do you know?
Sunny frowned.
Actually, I never heard him call it anything except for this beauty. Come to think of it, knowing Noctis, that could have actually been the name, this beauty.
Nephis listened to them with a hint of interest, while Cassie chuckled.
Sounds like something he would do, indeed. In that case, we should give it a good name. Let's come up with one before this journey is over.
They plummeted through the clouds, and as they did, Sunny could feel the ferocious pressure of the crushing assault the flying vessel. At that height, it should have been obliterating, but to his surprise, he didn't feel too uncomfortable. Lines of ethereal light ignited along the hull of the ship, as if a powerful enchantment had been activated, and the invisible weight grew weak. Soon, the clouds receded, and the patchwork landscape of the chained isles was revealed far below. Islands shone on the velvet backdrop of the dark abyss like precious gems, connected to each other by the thin threads of the heavenly chains, and there, right beneath the descending vessel, was an island that Sunny knew all too well. His face darkened a little.
Place, huh? I never thought I would return here one day.
Below them were the ruins of the Red Colosseum. The Red Colosseum was in ruins. Its ancient walls had collapsed, and were now overgrown with verdant vines. The people who had once crowded the tribunes were all long dead, and yet even the passage of countless years failed to wash away the stain of blood from the surface of the stone that had once been pristine white. Sunny knew from Cassie that the Colosseum was in a sorry state. He also knew that the island had been infested by all kinds of nightmare creatures. Probably the remains of Solvin's menagerie of monsters, before the fire keepers wiped them out. The fire keepers had also cleared the floor of the arena in order to reveal the buried runes, and now, Cassie was slowly walking along the grooves, tracing their shapes with her steps. Sunny himself was in a bleak mood. He studied the ruins, remembering the countless bloody battles that had been fought here. This was where he had killed the stone gargoyles. This was where he had killed the emerald skeleton. And this was where he had almost lost his life to the blade of one of the red zealots. It had been thousands of years since his escape from the Colosseum. No, not quite. In truth, he had never been here at all. The bloody arena he knew was just a mirage conjured up by the spell, while this was the real thing. It didn't change its vile nature, though. He whispered, "Glory." Nephis turned at the sound of his whisper. Her striking gray eyes were somber.
Is this the arena where you were imprisoned?
Sunny nodded.
Yes, the cage they kept me in was right there, below that pile of rubble. Back then, I barely knew how to move the body that the spell had given me. Coming to my senses inside that thing was quite a shock.
He looked at her, wondering what body Neph had received in her own nightmare. She must have been startled to find herself thrust into a non-human vessel, too. After all, there had been no divine aspect users before them, and divine aspects, for all their benefits, didn't come with an instruction manual. Changing Star nodded slowly. He said he could imagine. She didn't say anything else, still keeping the details of her nightmare to herself. Sunny sighed.
Well, anyway, the first few days were rough, and every day that followed was rough, too. I had to fight my way to the center of the arena and face the zealots of the Red Sect there each time, and all the while, crowds of people were cheering me on from the stands. Creepy bastards. They were equally happy to see us slaves kill or see us die, all for the glory of War God.
Kai, who was nearby, nodded.
I faced those zealots too, on the battlefield. Everyone in the Kingdom of Hope was mad by that point, but the warmongers were especially wicked, and they were indeed just as Sunny described them, equally happy to kill as they were to die. Their faith had been perverted beyond belief.
He glanced at the blood-stained stones and added after a short pause.
Now that I think about it, maybe it's not a coincidence that the followers of War God were that way. War God is also the deity of humanity, after all.
Sunny chuckled.
Yes, well, anyway, I got better as time went on, enough to survive until the moment I could escape, and I did.
Nephis looked around silently.
It must have been hard to survive alone.
He shrugged.
It would have been, but I wasn't alone. There was this guy with me, a local awakened, a healer. Without him, I wouldn't have lasted nearly as long as I did.
He studied the ruins for a few moments, then gestured in a certain direction.
That was where Solving killed him in the end, at the edge of the island. The fool decided to find courage in the worst moment possible.
Sunny remained silent for a while, then sighed.
Still, I guess it's better to die with courage than to die without it, not that I would know.
He looked at Nephis and smiled.
I must have slaughtered 1,000 enemies in this arena, both abominations and humans, but knowing you, I bet even more died by your sword in the nightmare.
She glanced north in the direction of the Hollow Mountains and shook her head.
No, actually, I didn't kill that many.
Sunny raised an eyebrow. He asked, "Wait, what really?" And if it was with her personality, Nephis smiled.
I was only dormant in my nightmare. I was the weakest creature there. By far, solving problems with a sword is a privilege for the strong.
He looked at her with a strange expression.
Well, you must have learned a lot then.
Weakness is a great teacher. As soon as the words left his mouth, Sunny regretted saying them. Nephis had always been a symbol of strength, in his mind, a domineering presence that swept away all obstacles to achieve her goals. But in truth, she had spent most of her life as prey being pursued by terrifying predators. Sunny still remembered the dream he had visited, a fragment of a memory she had about one of the attempts on her life. She knew about weakness just as much as he did. Neff's smile slowly faded away. She remained silent for a while, and then nodded. She agreed that she had learned a lot.
Great. Maybe think twice before opening your mouth the next time, fool.
Sunny hesitated, thinking what to say. The solemn atmosphere was destroyed a moment later, though by a loud crinkling noise. Sunny, Nephis, and Kai turned around and looked at Effie, who was completely focused on opening a packet of chips. The bright colors of the modern packaging looked extremely out of place in the ancient ruin, feeling their attention. The huntress looked up, lowered her sunglasses to the tip of her nose, and raised her eyebrows. Then, she sent a mouthful of synth chips into her mouth and looked around, chewing. After a while, she said, "What?"
I must admit, though, I am a little upset. That wench Solving was from the same sect as me, right? How come the temple I ended up in wasn't nearly as grand and majestic? I mean, do you know how small and damp my room was?
She shook her head with a sour face.
What's even the point of being in a sect of war zealots if you don't have an awesome arena like this?
Nothing much happened on the island that had once been the heart of Solving's lands. The Fire Keepers, it seemed, had been very thorough in exterminating every abomination here, even after several hours. No one had bothered the Five Masters, not that many things could. While Cassie was exploring the ruins, Sunny simply wandered around the ruins, remembering his days of fighting in the Colosseum. The others had nothing much to do, so they followed him. Sometimes starting a conversation, sometimes remaining silent. Eventually, Effie sighed. She remarked that the mood was so dismal.
This sucks, and what kind of vacation is that?
Sunny looked at her humorlessly.
What were you expecting? I didn't exactly have a great time in this damned place. Should I be jumping around in joy?
She blinked a couple of times.
I mean, yeah, why not? Think about it. This Colosseum is in ruins, but you're still standing. What's not to celebrate?
Sunny tilted his head a little, then looked at the overgrown remains of the Red Colosseum once more. The place was desolate and forgotten, with nothing remaining of its former glory. Glory, the bastards who had lusted for it, who had turned Hope's theater into a temple of murder, never found any such thing. Sunny, however, had survived. Not only that, but he was also a decorated officer now, complete with the highest military awards one could receive. Earned in a war much more meaningful than the senseless one the warmongers had waged. He had never put much meaning into his medals, but now that they turned into something to spite Solvain and her zealots with.
Damn, it almost feels better than killing her twice.
A crooked smile appeared on his face.
Well, if you put it like that, I guess you're right, Effie. I am much more impressive than these fools ever were, aren't I? Hell, they're making a movie about me in Northern Quadrant Siege Capital, even.
She glanced at him with an amused expression.
Let's not get a big head, doofus. And what do you mean, a movie? Another one.
Noticing her petrified expression, he grinned and told her not to worry, as it was about Mongrel, technically. While Effie let out a relieved sigh, Nephis suddenly nodded and said she had seen the trailer. Kai and Sunny looked at her with surprise, while Effie made a strange face and walked away.
Gods, I think I'm going to be sick.
She really looked ill. Sunny laughed as he watched her go.
Hey, where are you going? The mood isn't so dismal anymore, is it?
The huntress just waved her hand and disappeared behind a pile of rubble. He chuckled, but his smile disappeared when Kai asked with a thoughtful expression.
If the trailer came out this quick, they must be putting a lot of resources into filming. I do wonder, though, are they going to cast an actor to play Mongrel, or an actress?
Sunny's eyes widened slightly.
What the hell do you mean, an actress?
Why would they cast an actress? Take that back. While they were bickering, Cassie finished exploring the runes carved in the bloodstained stone. Soon, the flying ship left the ruins of the Red Colosseum behind and cut through the sky. The night had descended upon the chained isles, erasing the border between the sky above and the sky below. Cold stars shone upon the remains of the shattered kingdom, reflected by the distant flames that burned in the dark abyss. The flying vessel was moving southeast. There weren't that many places that Sunny wanted to visit on the chained isles. His main goal was the Shipwreck Island, where the corpse of the Sun Prince swung above the sky below, tangled in heavenly chains, but he was also interested in one other, the Southern Island, where the ruined castle of the Shadow Lord stood, and where he had fought Nightmare. The black steed had become his shadow, but that was just the phantom of the spell. Sunny couldn't help but feel curious about what had happened to the real Nightmare. Was he perhaps still here, somewhere, in this region of the dream realm? The Dark Courser wasn't on the Southern Island anymore. That was sure, after all. Sunny had visited the ruined fortress in the waking world before even knowing what it was. That was where he had welcomed Effie and Kai to the Chained Isles, and hadn't met Nightmare there. Still, maybe there were some clues. Countless years had passed since the time when the shadow creature remained in the castle, stubbornly guarding the citadel of a dead master. Was the real Nightmare still alive? Had he grown stronger? Had he succumbed to the corruption that seemed to have devoured everything and everyone else in the dream realm? Sunny wanted to know, but most of all, he was interested in finding a shadow creature. It could lead to a lot of fragments at worst, and a new shadow at best, apart from the Southern Island, though Nephis obviously didn't have any places in mind. Effie wished to visit the Temple of the Chalice. Kai would have wanted to return to the Ivory City, perhaps, to reminisce on the past, but that city was no more. It had fallen into the sky below, replaced by the ever-growing tear that would one day swallow all the Chained Isles. Strangely, the place where Cassie would have wanted to visit was gone, too. The Night Temple, where she had spent several months caring for her mentor, the one in the north, was destroyed as a result of the battle between Sky Tide and St. Cormac. The blind girl did add one location to the list, though, and a very strange one, at that. The island where an eerie creature of the lake had once bestowed them with the ruby knife. Sunny didn't know what she wanted to find there, but had no objections to her request. They were going to the southern island first, however, so that creepy place was still far away, enjoying the view of the starlit sky. Sunny breathed in the cool night air and smiled as he listened to his friends chatting. There would be dangers and dire threats once he returned to Antarctica, but for the next few days, life promised to be tranquil and uncomplicated. There would be a bit of exploration, a bit of treasure hunting, and a bit of fighting as well, but not the dreadful kind. It was truly like a vacation. His smile grew a little wistful.
Damnation, just when did the dream realm become nicer than the waking world?
The flying vessel continued moving southeast. The members of the cohort remained at the stern, keeping Cassie company. They spent some time idly talking about this and that, then silently enjoyed the beautiful sight of the night sky, safely hidden within the crushing. They were temporarily safe from all threats. That feeling was strange. The only thing stranger was the fact that Effie seemed to have lost her appetite, somehow. Now that was an anomaly unlike anything Sunny had witnessed before. He wanted to tease the huntress, but changed his mind at the last moment. The quiet night put him in a contemplative mood. The thing Sunny thought about was how hard it had become to keep a conversation going in the company of his friends these days, or anyone else, really. He had never been a great conversationalist. In fact, growing up, Sunny had always found it torturously hard to fit in with people. But after becoming an awakened, somewhere along the way, he seemed to have developed that ability. Now, however, it was getting harder once again. Sunny had thought that such problems would miraculously disappear after he chose to trust the people he cared about, but he had been proven wrong.
Oh, it's strange.
But then, was it really? In truth, it wasn't his ability to hold a conversation that was the problem, but his whole life instead. Most of the things he thought and did were too sensitive to discuss, not because he didn't trust his friends, but because he didn't want to involve them in his mess. More than that, Sunny had only done two things after coming to Antarctica: fight the nightmare creatures and try to fulfill his duty as a member of the evacuation army. He didn't really have any hobbies or exciting things to share. His friends were more or less the same.
Is it all there's to life, bloodshed and war?
As he studied the night sky with a wistful expression, Kai looked at him and asked for a penny for his thoughts. A pale smile appeared on Sunny's face.
It's nothing. I was just thinking about how messed up our lives have become. These days, it seems that there's nothing to talk about except for what we killed, how we killed it, and how to kill it better. So I'm wondering, is that what adulthood is? Work, work, and then more work. I thought that becoming a master would be freeing, but honestly, I was having so much more fun as an awaken.
Kai sighed.
It does seem like that, doesn't it?
Effie, who was hugging the wooden railing of the flying ship as if battling motion sickness, looked at them with a miserable face.
I don't know what you're talking about. I am having tons of fun every day.
Sunny gave her a dubious look.
Yeah, maybe check the expiration date the next time you smuggle a bunch of snacks into the dream realm. Those synthetic chips must have been left over from the dark times, considering your current state.
She gritted her teeth, then made a rude gesture in his direction. Sunny grinned at that moment. Cassie suddenly spoke.
I get what Sunny is saying, but is there something wrong with being focused on work? I am usually very busy, too, and there's little time for anything else except for my duties. However, it's not bad. I find it very rewarding, actually.
Sunny scoffed.
I guess there's nothing wrong as long as you've chosen the right profession, but being an abomination exterminator doesn't really suit my taste, and I didn't even choose it, really. It just happened that way.
Nephis gave him a long look, then turned away and said evenly.
It's true that none of us chose to become infected by the spell, but we are awakened now. So, exterminating abominations comes with the territory. We receive plenty of privileges in exchange. There's no point in thinking about the past with regret.
Sunny glanced at her with a bleak expression. Well, it wasn't like she was wrong, no matter how dejected he felt about the current situation. It was infinitely better than his mundane life in the outskirts. What would have awaited Sunny if he had never become infected by spell? A bitter life and an early grave, most likely. No, actually, a grave would have been an impossible luxury. Kai lingered for a few moments before saying quietly,
It's not the past that worries me, it's the future.
Effie remained silent, but her face turned somber. Sonny looked at his friend with curiosity. He asked what he meant. Kai shrugged.
The Antarctica campaign seems like a world of its own, but it'll be over in a handful of months. What happens next? The influx of refugees and the loss of the southern quadrant will make living conditions across the waking world worse for everyone. There will be an unprecedented influx of awakened, as well, which is bound to change the situation in the dream realm. The great clans seem to be in turmoil, and on top of that, there's no guarantee that something like the Chain of Nightmares won't happen again. I am not talking about the future of the human race, though I am talking about our personal future. What will be our roles in that world?
Sonny lingered for a while. He said he had no idea. Kai sighed, then glanced at Nephis.
Lady Nephis and Cassie will most likely become saints with the backing of Clan Valor, but that path is closed for the rest of us, unless we swear allegiance to a legacy clan. Alternatively, we can remain with the government, but if Antarctica has proven one thing, it's that the government isn't strong enough to protect the waking world with only its own strength. So what's the point?
Sonny studied his face for a few moments. Kai, it seemed, was struggling with his naively sincere sense of duty. He asked,
So what? Are you thinking about becoming a legacy?
The handsome archer looked at him with a heavy expression.
Aren't you?
Sonny smiled with a corner of his mouth, then turned away.
No, I'd rather die, to be honest.
There was no need to add that last part, really, because he was always honest. Even if Sonny was destined to forever remain a master, he wouldn't join the likes of Valor and Song. Sainthood was an alluring goal, but it wasn't worth selling himself into slavery to a sovereign. One chain, no matter how soft, was already enough. As for the future, he really had no idea what was going to happen after the Antarctica campaign was over. The great clans would clash in earnest, but by that point, their battles would most likely move to the dream realm. Sonny would have liked to avoid becoming swept up in that conflict, but he had a strong suspicion that, for him, it was going to be nearly impossible.
There's no point in thinking about the future, either.
The four of them glanced at Cassie with surprise. She had remained silent throughout the conversation, but suddenly spoke at that precise moment. Coming from an oracle, that statement sounded a bit ominous. Sonny raised an eyebrow. He asked, "Yeah, and why was that?" Gently controlling the flying ship, Cassie kept quiet for a few moments. Then, a sad smile appeared on her face.
There was no spell a century ago. There were no saints a few decades ago. There was no chain of nightmares a couple of years ago. What will happen in the future? Nobody knows, so making plans is useless. All we can do is prepare to face the unknown.
Visiting the southern island wasn't as useful as Sonny had hoped it would be. Too much time had passed since the days when Nightmare guarded the abandoned castle. Consumed by madness, the castle had long turned into ruins, and the land itself had been transformed by the crushing. However, Sonny did end up finding a clue. That clue wasn't on the island, but rather in what wasn't on the island, when he had visited this place as a favor to Noctis. There had been beautiful white flowers blooming in the emerald grass around the castle, but now they were gone, of course. There was nothing strange about some flowers disappearing after thousands of years of desolation. Nevertheless, Sonny remembered that he had seen these particular flowers elsewhere on the Chained Isles. There was a whole island covered by them. That island was considered extremely dangerous because there were numerous bones hidden beneath the beautiful carpet of white blossoms. Anyone who stepped on it would succumb to an overwhelming desire to sleep, never to wake up. Among the awakened anchored in the sanctuary, that island was synonymous with death. There were too many connections for it to be a pure coincidence, and so Sonny decided to visit the island of white flowers as well. It was further east, however, so that stop was going to have to wait. First, the flying ship had to travel north and skirt the tier for a while to reach the Shipwreck Island. They spent 2 days making their way there. The ship had to stop once to give Cassie time to rest and restore soul essence. In the meantime, the rest of them made use of the idle time to enjoy some peace and quiet. The ancient vessel turned into a leisure yacht for a few days. Nephis was in charge of cooking, while the rest of them were in charge of eating. They talked, enjoyed each other's company, and tried really hard to forget the cold dread of Antarctica for a few fleeting moments. They even tried playing several games. Sadly, it was hard to find a suitable one, considering that Kai always knew when someone was telling the truth. Cassie could sense the future, and Sunny wasn't above using his shadows to cheat. In the end, they settled for competing to see who was the best cheater. Nephis lost pretty much every game after that. Observing her try to hide her frustration was rather entertaining, at least for Sunny, who won the most.
I've forgotten how awkward she really is. She's hiding it well these days. It's cute. Crude, it's crude.
Effie was still suffering from motion sickness and eating less than she usually did, which meant only 2 to 3 times more than what a normal person would eat. Naturally, luckily, the ship was attacked by a few nightmare creatures during their only stop so far, so they had plenty of fresh meat to feed her. Kai was teaching Sunny how to play the flute. It was actually starting to feel like a vacation. Eventually, they reached the Shipwreck Island. It was exactly as it had been before, except for the fact that the feature that had given the island its name, the shipwreck, was now missing. The corpse of the Sun Prince was still there, though the steel colossus was swinging forlornly below the island, its legs tangled in the remains of a torn heavenly chain. The first time Sunny had seen it, he wondered about what terrible creature could have killed the fearsome giant. Who could have thought that it had actually been Cassie and Effie? Well, technically, it had been someone else, but in the nightmare, the immortal chain lord had fallen by their hands. Nephis stared at the steel colossus for a long time. She had never seen it before, so he must have made an expression. After a while, she asked,
This is one of the immortals you killed.
Effie tore her gaze away from the giant corpse and shivered.
Yeah, and this was where we fought the defenders of the Ivory City. The city itself is gone now, but that huge bastard is still here. See how his chest is cracked? That's because Cassie rammed him with the flying ship at full speed. Crazy girl. We all thought she died for a minute or two.
Nephis lowered her head while Effie sighed and added,
It's hard to guess now, but that giant was filled with molten metal. Within that metal was a human-shaped cage. And within that cage was a thing that had once been a human. I pushed the bastard over the edge of the island, then crawled to its chest and killed the thing inside. It was a hot mess of a situation. I had plenty of burns to prove it.
She made a disgusted face, then glanced at Sunny.
So, doofus, we just need to bring you to what's left of the Sun Prince.
Sunny shook his head.
No, first, we need to get rid of the creature that lives below the island.
He hadn't forgotten about the terrifying abomination that was hidden on the dark side of the Shipwreck Island, the memories of watching its long, root-like tentacles stretch from the darkness shrouding the bottom of the isle and snatch fallen demons like flies were still fresh in his mind. That was how the creature fed. It used the corpse of the Sun Prince as bait to devour chain worms. But things had changed. Back then, he had been a mere awaken. A corrupted nightmare creature had been synonymous with death, despair, and hopelessness. But now, he had killed more corrupted abominations than he could be bothered to count. Sunny had grown much more powerful, even when compared to how he had been as a master before Antarctica. He was incomparably stronger and more experienced. A mere corrupted creature didn't scare him anymore, which didn't mean that it was wise to abandon caution, no matter how powerful he had become. One mistake was always all it took to perish in the dream realm. Throwing one last glance at the swinging steel corpse, he turned away and told Cassie to start lowering the ship. It would have been hard to fight the creature dwelling on the dark side of the island in usual circumstances. After all, below it was the endless expanse of the dark abyss, and humans weren't known for their ability to fly. Fighting a corrupted abomination while hanging from the treacherous stone surface of the underside of the isle was a suicidal task. Of course, there were ways to gain an advantage even in that situation. Kai, for example, could indeed fly. Sunny could assume the Shadow Fiend form, which was perfectly suited for just these kinds of battles. Effie was strong enough to dig a path to the creature from the surface in no time. And so on. None of it was necessary today, though, because they had Cassie and the flying ship. the graceful vessel dove into the sky below and descended until the Shipwreck Island, as well as the creature hiding in its shade, was above them. They maintained a safe distance for now. But the main disadvantage was already erased. He said, "Big." Sunny peered into the darkness shrouding the bottom of the isle. There were large cavities in the stone and soil, making the whole island seem like a giant beehive. These caves were narrow and deep, and there was something hiding in their depths. He didn't have to rely on his eyes, though. Cassie let go of the steering oars and stepped out of the runic circle, getting closer to the wooden railings. She observed the dark ravines for a while, then sighed.
It's a corrupted monster, an old and powerful one.
The blind girl could perceive aspects, abilities, and attributes of Awakened, but that power allowed her to learn about nightmare creatures, too, their strengths, their weaknesses, their nature. Cassie was an invaluable source of knowledge in that regard, and knowledge was the origin of power. She tilted her head a little.
It's a plant abomination, blood-nourished root. I've an idea of how it came to be.
The others looked at her with interest. Sunny raised an eyebrow. He asked how she would know that. Cassie pointed at the mast of their ship.
The enchantments of this vessel are meant to be powered by a sacred tree from Hot Guard's Grove. I found a sapling to replace the original tree, which had died when the ship crashed, but I think it hadn't died immediately.
She thought for a few moments.
The sacred tree must have survived the destruction of the vessel and rooted itself in the soil of the island. However, the wormvine had been unleashed within the wreck. It grew and suffocated the tree, turning it into a corpse. The roots remained, though, and so did Salvin. Her blood seeped into the soil and was absorbed by the roots throughout the centuries. Salvin didn't succumb to the corruption, but the roots did. That was how this monster was born.
A sigh escaped from Cassie's lips.
In any case, it's vast and ancient, but weak to fire. We can burn the root to ash without destroying the island.
After she said those words, everyone involuntarily turned to Nephis. Changing Star's expression didn't change at all. A moment later, she said that she would do it. Sunny shook his head and said there was no need. He knew that Neph could slay the blood-nourished root without too much trouble. She could also lend her flames to him or Saint, but that would require her to use her aspect, which would trigger her flaw for most Awakened. Using their aspects was as natural as breathing, especially so for Sunny, who always observed the world through his shadows. However, Nephis very rarely used her own. Strangers might not have noticed it, but anyone close to her knew that she only activated her abilities during battles, and even then only the most dire ones. That was how it had been on the Forgotten Shore, and that was how it was now, usually. Neph relied on only her physical prowess and skill to fight, because she had to burn alive every time she called upon her powers. So, what kind of vacation would it be if she was forced to go through that suffering in the middle of it? Sunny glanced at her and shrugged.
Just summon the Dawn Shard, we'll deal with the creature ourselves.
Each flaw was a curse, but theirs were curses of a different kind. By his side, Effie sighed.
The hell is it?
A thin layer of polished metal suddenly covered her skin, making the huntress look like a beautiful steel statue. By her side, Kai summoned his ivory armor, as well as the transcendent bow he had received after slaying the corrupted tyrant, malignant grave root. An arrow that seemed to contain a sea of flames appeared on the black string. Sunny himself summoned the cruel sight, which ignited with the incandescent glow of divine flame. Nephis looked at them with a tense expression. He said that he could do it. Effie smiled.
Princess, at your age, you should really know the difference between can and should. Nobody is doubting that you can kill that monster. But just relax for once and let someone else have fun too. Okay.
With that, the huntress grinned and dashed to the edge of the deck. When she jumped, the enchanted lines shone a little brighter, as if straining to prevent the ancient wood from splintering because of the furious force of her push. Effie shot through the darkness toward the underside of the island. As she flew, her steel skin suddenly started to shine, turning white-hot. Not a moment later, a massive root appeared from one of the caves and stretched towards the huntress. She twisted, avoiding being grabbed by it and landing on the long wooden tentacle instead. Every spot her incandescent armor touched instantly started to burn. More roots appeared from within the island. Kai was already in the air, drawing the string of his black bow. Sunny, however, wasn't moving yet, with a grimace. He called upon the shadows clinging to the underside of the aisle. They instantly surged forward, falling upon the roots like guillotine blades. The pressure on Effie and Kai was instantly reduced, throwing a glance at Nephis. Sunny summoned the dark wing and smiled.
Yeah, sorry, you'll have to sit this one out.
Then, he brandished the cruel sight and pushed himself off the deck. The battle didn't last long.
Oh, it stinks.
Effie once again looked like she was going to be sick, this time from all the smoke that drifted from inside the Shipwreck Island, where the charred remains of the blood-nourished root were smoldering after being slain by her. Sunny scoffed. He looked at who was complaining. He was playing with a transcendent soul shard, but the huntress was the one who ended up with the real prize. There was a strange spear in her hand. Its shaft was made of gray wood, but the spearhead glinted with a deep crimson color, as if it had been cast in blood. Effie made a face.
Well, yeah, it's a good spear. The creature absorbed Solvain's blood, right? So it's like an inheritance from the greatest warrior of the sect. But Sunny, what was the one question I asked you at the start of our trip?
He frowned, trying to remember.
Whether the creature I needed to kill was edible.
She pierced him with a bleak look.
Exactly, and is it? No, what am I supposed to gnaw on burned wood?
Sunny laughed.
Gods, don't worry, we'll find something to feed you.
She simply waved her hand.
Don't bother, the smoke stench made me lose my appetite anyway.
They were currently getting ready to climb down to the remains of the Sun Prince. A familiar golden rope was tied to a large piece of stone that must have been a part of a towering docking mast once. And the four of them, Sunny, Effie, Nephis, and Cassie, were standing near the edge of the island. The flying ship was anchored to one of the masts, and Kai had already flown down to connect the other end of the rope to the remains of the heavenly chain. The island itself was in a descent phase, so they didn't have to be wary of the crushing anytime soon. Either, he said, I'm going then. Sunny grabbed the rope and started climbing down. Soon, they found themselves standing on the sole of one of the steel giant's feet. It was wide like a platform, and almost horizontal, making for a perfect landing spot. He said that life was weird like that. Sometimes. Sunny had once seen a nightmare where he was one of Solvain's soldiers, fighting in a harrowing battle against the forces of the Ivory City. In that dream, he and all of his comrades had been mercilessly crushed beneath this soul. It was a bit strange to be standing on top of it now. The others looked at him expectantly.
So, Sunny, are you going to tell us why we're here?
Kai's usually composed voice was full of curiosity. Sunny smiled. He said that, yes, and to wait a second. A moment later, a scrawny creature suddenly rose from his shadow. The little fiend opened his eyes wide and stared at the members of the cohort. His mouth hung open, revealing 2 rows of sharp, triangular teeth. Nephis, Effie, Cassie, and Kai. They indeed made for an unforgettable sight. The former 2 were strikingly beautiful, while the latter 2 were simply beyond reason. Sunny wasn't so bad himself, either. His friends focused on the ravenous fiend in turn.
Sunny, what's that?
Nephis looked down and moved her leg slightly, avoiding Imp's finger. The little bastard was so stunned that he tried to poke her, as if wanting to make sure that she was a real being and not a divine vision. Sunny coughed.
This ugly thing is a new shadow of mine. I call him Imp.
Effie suddenly exploded in laughter.
Oh, this is too good. So the little gremlin has a mini version of himself now.
Sunny glared at her.
Funny you should say that, Beanpole, because Imp is actually more of a mini version of you. It's always hungry, has no manners, and eats like a gluttonous barbarian.
Both of them, Imp and Effie, looked at him with offended expressions. He simply smiled.
But unlike Effie, this little guy actually profits from eating more than humanly possible. So, come on, trashling, chop chop. You see this giant steel colossus. I want you to eat it whole.
The members of the cohort looked at Sunny with wide eyes. Imp, meanwhile, looked down at the surface of the steel soul for the first time ever. His ugly face actually paled. Sunny frowned.
What are you waiting for? Start eating. But climb down first. If you start from the leg, you'll fall into the sky below. I did that once and survived, but a useless wretch like you'll definitely die."
The little fiend shivered, then threw a hateful glance at Sunny and obediently started climbing down. He acted with apparent reluctance, but his tiny eyes were secretly glinting with hungry avarice. Sunny shook his head.
"This bastard, I bet he'll finish the whole Colossus in less than 3 days."
That much had to be enough to push the ravenous fiend to the next step of his nascent steel body, and maybe even a little past that. Sunny was also thinking about trying to make the shadow swallow a few pieces of the heavenly chains. He also remembered that there was a giant steel arm on the Iron Hand Island, although the inhabitants of the sanctuary would probably notice if it suddenly went missing. At that moment, he realized that the members of the cohort were staring at him with strange expressions.
"On what?"
Kai hesitated for a few moments, then cleared his throat.
Don't you think it would be nice to tell us a bit about Imp, and why is it that you want him to eat the Sun Prince?
Effie nodded.
Yeah, and how did you end up with that shadow anyway? From what you told us before, creating them requires a steep price to be paid, so why this weak, tiny creature?
Sunny glanced at them with a dull expression.
"Yeah, all right, I'll tell you. He needs to eat a lot of enchanted metal to get stronger. That tiny menace is a transcendent devil, by the way. In fact, he was the second most dangerous nightmare creature in the Antarctic Center. As for how he ended up becoming my shadow, I killed that bastard, of course. Had him eaten alive by a bunch of carnivorous beetles. It's actually a long story. Come, let's climb back, make some dinner. And I'll share this epic tale with you in detail."
Strips of meat were roasting above the fire, and a delicious fragrance permeated the air. The remains of the corrupted monster crackled as they burned. Somewhere far away, ancient chains rattled loudly. Darkness shrouded the world outside the circle of light cast by the dancing flames.
And that was the moment when the explosives detonated. Boom. I don't know how the whole city didn't just slide into the ocean, but it was really something. The wall fell, the buildings crumbled to dust, the earth itself sank. But I didn't see any of this, of course, because I was right in the middle of the explosion, protected only by a few layers of manifested shadows.
The members of the cohort were staring at Sunny with wide eyes. Well, except for Cassie, of course. Nephis had been paying more attention to roasting the meat. But as the story went on, she seemed to become more and more distracted. He grinned.
And the scavenger was right there with me. I couldn't let the wretch escape into the shadows, so I held onto him with one hand and pummeled him with the other. At that distance, swords were of no use, so he started biting, and let me tell you, his teeth were really, really sharp.
Sunny smiled, revealing his own teeth, then suddenly made a ferocious face.
But not as sharp as mine. I bit the bastard too. At that point, the sphere of shadows was already breaking, and the heat inside was like an oven. It had survived the initial detonation, but got tossed around by the shockwave and then rolled down into the crater before finally shattering.
His expression relaxed.
Well, anyway, I came to my senses a bit faster than the scavenger, who got pinned to the ground by some debris. Problem was, I still had no way of breaking his armor. Luckily, I still had a chest full of the dark beetles with me, so before the fiend could free himself, I poured the beetles out, and they ate him alive. A fitting end for a corpse eater, don't you think? And since those beetles weren't exactly living things, the spell attributed the kill to me. And so that was how I received a new shadow.
There was silence for a few moments. Eventually, Effie shook her head.
Wait. So you're telling us that this ravenous fiend stalked you across all of the Antarctic Center, infiltrated a siege capital, and waited for weeks to ambush you at the worst possible moment? Since when are nightmare creatures that smart?
Kai glanced at her with surprise.
Are we just going to ignore the fact that Sunny killed a Titan?
Sunny laughed.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. The first months of the operation were really wild, what can I say?
There was a startled pause in the silence. Cassie asked in a worried voice.
But what happened to your soldiers? Were they all right? You said that the ravenous fiend gravely wounded one of them.
Sunny's smile slowly faded away. He stayed quiet for a few moments, then sighed.
Yes, they were fine. Luster lost his legs, but he survived. He's currently back in the northern quadrant, recovering after receiving treatment from the best government healers. Kimmy is right here in East Antarctica. She's with Army Command now.
His eyes grew distant.
Quentin is still marked as missing in action, officially. As for Belle, Dorn, and Samara, they died a few days later when we tried to fight the Winter Beast. Everyone died that day except me and Jet.
In the silence that followed, Cassie sighed lightly and said she was sorry. Sunny glanced at her sharply. It was strangely off-putting. To hear those words coming out of her mouth, he knew very well that she wasn't one for apologies.
Have I unknowingly been waiting for something stupid like that for the last couple of years?
He shook his head, then put a smile on his face.
Yeah, I am sorry too, but that's how Antarctica is. It has a way of reminding you that no matter how strong you've become, there's always something stronger out there, waiting to eat you alive.
Sunny lingered for a bit, looked at Nephis, and said in a carefree tone,
I've tasted a lot of failure there. It's a bitter thing, failure, but after everything is said and done, I think it's more of a medicine than poison. You should try it too, sometime, before it's too late.
He didn't know why he was being combative with Neph, but her confidence was really frustrating to observe recently. Perhaps it was because he felt protective of her. Changing Star had put herself in terrible danger by joining Clan Valor. After all, she was facing death and destruction, but acted as if everything was under her control. She was wrong. The great clans, the sovereigns, these people weren't someone who could be controlled. Hearing his remark, Nephis calmly turned the meat and looked in Sunny's direction. Her voice was even.
I think I know more about failure than anyone here.
He frowned. He asked when she had ever failed. Nephis sighed and continued tending to the meat.
I failed to keep you by my side in the Dark City, didn't I? I failed to take control of the Bright Castle, too. I wanted to usurp Gunlog's throne a few days after killing him. I had everything prepared, but in the end, it took many weeks of bloody struggle to achieve the goal. Each additional day that passed, each sleeper that died fighting fellow humans, were my failures. It wasn't easy to come to terms with.
She took the fragrant meat off the fire and started placing it on the plates.
I failed in the Crimson Spire, too. I failed to achieve the best result, and even messed up in my attempt to salvage the mistake. And I've failed countless times since.
She smiled, then handed Sunny his plate.
But that's all right. You said it yourself. Failure might be bitter, but it's a medicine, and now, let's eat. Hopefully, this meat will taste better.
They ended up spending 3 idle days on the Shipwreck Island. It had long been cleansed of the feral sailor dolls by the fire keepers, and no new nightmare creatures made it their home since. The 5 masters remained on the island when it was low, and sought shelter on the flying ship when it rose high enough to become affected by the crushing. Imp was devouring the steel colossus with startling speed while they rested and relaxed. Sunny hadn't had an opportunity to truly let go of his worries in a long time, so this change of pace was most welcome. Vacationing in the dream realm wasn't really one's idea of fun, but they made the most of it. Effie seemed to have regained her appetite, although she was still being picky about her food. It seemed that the military rations had left an unforgettable impression on the gluttonous huntress. As a result, the mountain of snacks she had brought over from the waking world was disappearing at a slower pace than the husk of the Sun Prince. She even shared some with the rest of them, which was both pleasant and a huge shock. The members of the cohort lazed around, avoided doing anything productive, and spent most of their time either sleeping or chatting idly. Sunny shared more stories about his days in the Antarctic Center with them. The first weeks of scrambling to push back the hordes of abominations and establish the siege capitals. Low 49, the first encounter with the devouring cloud, the heart of darkness, almost getting killed by Goliath, the escape toward Falcon Scott and the long weeks of its siege. He had thought that remembering these events would bring nothing but bitterness, but strangely, talking about them and sharing the memories of the people he had met, his soldiers, Bate and Professor Obel, the captains of the Irregulars, the defenders of Falcon Scott, was almost soothing. Of course, these conversations inevitably veered more in the direction of discussing various nightmare creatures, battle strategies, and ways to kill the abominations better. The other members of the cohort had encountered countless enemies of their own in the time they were apart, so there was a lot of knowledge, insights, and accumulated experience to share. The others talked about their lives, too. Effie was having trouble being in charge of hundreds of people, although she was a competent battle commander. The idea of being in a position of leadership was alien to her. Luckily, Kai was usually nearby to give her support and advice. His experience serving as a centurion in the Sun Legion during the nightmare was of tremendous help. Sunny had a thing or two to say about being put in a position of power despite not wanting to carry that burden. As well, Cassie, meanwhile, was a wellspring of insight about the administrative and practical sides of managing a powerful force of awakened. Needless to say, Nephis had a unique perspective on that topic, too, although she was as frugal with her words as ever. Nevertheless, both Neph and Cassie did share a few things about how they were doing within Valor. As it turned out, they were in a somewhat awkward position. The Great Clan was putting great expectations on Changing Star, but at the same time, didn't trust her much yet. She had been treated with respect and favor, but also held at arm's length, prohibited from coming anywhere near the really important issues of the domain. She had only met Anvil once, and even then briefly. Sunny was immensely curious to learn about the King of Swords, but that conversation got sidetracked entirely by Kai, who looked at them with confusion and asked what kind of anvil they were talking about. As it turned out, the handsome archer knew nothing about the sovereigns. Learning that there were already supremes living among humans was a shock to him. Effie, on the other hand, had already known. She had received a few hints about this forbidden knowledge from her first cohort on the Forgotten Shore, and then pieced the rest together herself after coming back. There had been a time when Nephis warned Sunny that simply knowing about the existence of the sovereigns could cost him his life. However, their situation was completely different now. All five weren't unknown entities in the awakened society anymore. They were renowned masters, universally considered potential pillars of the next generation. In other words, they had earned the right to know some secrets. In fact, they had to know, because it made putting a leash on them easier. So, Nephis shared more knowledge about the domains with Kai and Effie. She didn't tell them, though, about her suspicions about how her father had perished, how the great clans had hunted her in the past, and how she was determined to destroy them. The two seemed to understand what was left untold. Nevertheless, just like they had understood why Castor died by Sunny's hand without being explained the reasons in detail, armed with that knowledge, it became easier for them to realize what Neph's position was in the great clan Valor. Paradoxically, Cassie's situation was a bit better. Valor was less wary of her, not considering the blind girl a serious threat, while the rest of the Firekeepers had simply become retainers. She had received the title of a seneschal, a high-ranking advisor, the position that was second only to the Forgemasters among the non-combatant specialists of the Great Clan. The war in Antarctica was the best chance for all of them, Nephis, Cassie, and the Firekeepers, to improve their standing within Valor. Only after proving their loyalty on the battlefield would they receive the chance to get closer to the rulers of the Great Clan, including the enigmatic sovereign.
What a mess.
Sunny was staring at the corpse of the Sun Prince, which was now missing its head, arms, and most of its torso. He could see the little figure of the imp laying lifelessly on top of a link of a heavenly chain, looking miserable and drunk from overeating. His remark was both about the state of the once fearsome chain lord and the situation that Nephis and Cassie had found themselves in, shaking his head. Sunny leaned over the edge of the island and shouted,
What are you doing, lazy waif? Stop fooling around and eat more.
Far below, Imp flinched, then looked up with a dull expression, awkwardly climbing to his feet. The little fiend then sighed, made a face, and lifelessly took a bite out of the steel giant's leg.
Well, that's better.
Imp chewed the ancient metal with a miserable expression, and then froze in the next moment. His scrawny body suddenly shimmered. Even though there was a considerable chunk of the Colossus left uneaten, Sunny ordered Imp to return. By the time the small creature climbed back to the surface of the island, the members of the cohort had gathered around Sunny.
And wait, the little rascal looks different.
Indeed, Effie was right. the scrawny fiend was different from how he had been before. Firstly, he had grown just a few days ago. Imp was barely as tall as Sunny's knee, but now his head was on the same level as Sunny's abdomen. The vital areas on his wiry body were now covered by black plates that resembled a suit of light armor, each glinting with a dark metallic sheen. The same went for his long, sharp claws and triangular teeth. Imp's face twisted in a grotesque grin, and he raised his chin with pride. After that, the little fiend threw a furtive glance at Nephis. Sunny smiled.
Congratulations, ugly. You've officially graduated from an unseemly gremlin to an unsightly goblin.
Imp's grin grew a bit forced. He glared at Sunny and hissed. Nephis looked at them for a few moments.
I don't know, I think he's a little cute.
The little fiend froze, then swelled with smugness. Sunny shook his head and sighed.
Are you blind? Well, whatever, let's see what exactly changed.
He summoned the runes, waited for the shimmering symbols to reveal themselves, and studied them with a focused expression. Most of the runes seemed the same. Shadow, ravenous fiend, shadow rank, transcendent, shadow class, devil. Neither the rank nor the class had changed, so the evolution must have been tied strictly to Imp's attributes. Sunny had anticipated such a result, so he wasn't too disappointed. Curious, he continued to read the runes. Shadow description: a pitiful little creature. Shadow attributes: lucky, marvel, ravenous. Shadow sworn, greater steel body. Sunny tilted his head a little.
Well,
This was good. Before, Imp possessed an attribute called lesser iron body. Sunny had expected one epithet to change, but not both of them. Not only had lesser changed to greater, but iron had also become steel. That was a considerable leap.
I wonder.
The description of the lesser iron body had implied that Imp's body possessed qualities of metal. What about the greater steel body? He concentrated on the shimmering symbols and read, jackpot, greater steel body attribute description. This shadow's body is akin to blessed steel. Not only had mundane iron been replaced by blessed steel, thanks to the Sun Prince, no doubt, but Imp's body had gone from merely possessing qualities of metal to being entirely like metal. What did it mean? It meant that the little fiend's whole body was now as resilient as a weapon forged out of transcendent steel would be. In other words, nearly indestructible, more indestructible than the original scavenger's already impregnable bone armor had been, at least. Sunny was very satisfied. He had achieved his initial goal of toughening up the ravenous fiend. However, he still wanted to know just how tough his shadow had become. There was only one way to find out, as Imp was puffing out his chest. Sunny smiled pleasantly and gave him a wholehearted kick. In the next moment, there was a dull metallic ring and a piercing shriek. God damn it, what the hell? That hurt so bad. Jumping on one foot, Sunny cradled his other one and glowered at the scrawny fiend, who had fallen on his butt with a startled expression.
Arg, Effie, whack this little bastard as hard as you can.
Effie lingered for a moment, then gave him a composed look.
I'll do no such thing, you heartless despot. Come here, poor thing, shall we bully your cruel master together? You're so adorable, in a hideous, nightmare-inducing kind of way.
Sunny stared at the scene in front of him with wide eyes. What the hell was happening? Why was everyone treating the wicked little wretch so well? He said, don't tell me, did Imp's lucky attribute influence how people felt about him as well? He said, that must be it. The scrawny fiend, meanwhile, glanced at Sunny with a vindictive grin, but there was something wrong with it. Suddenly, Imp's eyes and mouth shone with fiery orange-red light, contrasted sharply against the black metallic sheen of his face. Imp's sharp steel teeth had also been black a few moments ago, but now they were shining with a red-hot glow and radiated scorching heat. It was as though there was an immolating infernal furnace inside the little fiend's maw. Sunny blinked a couple of times, then shifted his gaze quickly to the runes. There was a new string at the end of the ravenous fiend's ability list. Shadow abilities. Scavenger. Devourer. Shadow step. Internal heat. He concentrated on the last ability without any delay. Internal heat ability description. This shadow's teeth and claws can be infused with annihilating heat, enhancing their cutting power. Sunny froze for a moment.
So, wait, this blessed steel gifted him not only with an affinity to metal, but also with an affinity to fire.
And the little rascal had even received a new ability out of it. Well, it made sense. Steel had to be tempered with fire, after all, and the Sun Prince had been drowned in molten metal before becoming the Steel Colossus. To atone for his perceived betrayal of Sun God's will, Sunny glanced at the scrawny fiend and sighed.
All right, stop glowering. I won't hit you anymore. You did well, wretch.
With that, he smiled and gave Imp a thumbs up. The small shadow hesitated for a few moments, then jumped to his feet. The scorching red glow radiating from his teeth slowly disappeared. He looked very proud of himself. Sunny nodded.
Good, and just look how tough and strong you've become.
Imp puffed out his chest again, listening as Sunny added,
I just can't wait to send you to fight all kinds of dreadfully powerful nightmare creatures.
Slowly, the arrogant expression on the scrawny fiend's face was replaced with one of concern and distress. Sunny smiled wickedly.
Yes, with a body like that, you won't be damaged too badly even if a titan chews on you a bit.
After Imp developed the greater steel body, there was no reason for them to remain on the Shipwreck Island. He had already absorbed everything he could from the body of the Sun Prince, so devouring the rest of the Colossus was of no benefit. The need to visit the Iron Hand Island had disappeared. As well, their vacation was slowly coming to an end. They still had a few days left, though, as well as plans to visit a few more isles. The flying ship cut across the starlit sky. Moving east, their first destination was the Temple of the Chalice. The ancient ruin was just like the last time Sunny had visited it. Forlorn and empty, even the wrathful specters that had populated the temple were gone, of course. He knew more about how the maiden priestesses had perished now, standing in the central chamber. Sunny looked at the shattered remains of the stone chalice and the bones littering the floor. The walls of the sacred hall had collapsed. The stone plates were cracked by a devastating explosion. After thousands of years, nothing but dust and desolation remained. He wondered about fate and the past. In the nightmare, he had been the one to destroy the chalice and slay the war maidens. However, even without Sunny, their end had been the same, who had killed the priestesses of the Red Sect in real past. Was it Noctis himself or someone else? What had happened to the child whose body Effie inhabited in the nightmare? Had the little girl been slain in the massacre, too? As usual, there were no answers. Effie herself wandered the ruins alone, her face uncharacteristically somber. The swords she had thrust into the ground once were all gone. The memories she carried, however, remained. Eventually, the huntress sighed and shook her head in dejection.
All that cruelty was pointless in the end, and what a waste.
Sunny remained silent, consumed by his own thoughts. This place held special meaning to him, too. This was where he had become a demon. It had only happened a couple of years ago, and yet, those years felt like a lifetime, a few lifetimes, really. Was it because of the nightmare or because of Antarctica that the past seemed so distant? They left the Temple of the Chalice behind and ventured to their next destination. On the island covered by white flowers, Sunny found Nightmare, the real Nightmare, or rather, what was left of him, after stepping foot into the field of flowers. Sunny swiftly succumbed to slumber. In the dream he was pulled into, a shapeless wraith appeared and instantly attacked him, burning with murderous madness and frenzy. It could have been dangerous for anyone else. But Sunny had too much experience fighting dreams. Nightmare the Shadow was also by his side, protecting him. Together, they battled the frenzied wraith and vanquished it. The wraith wasn't the real Nightmare. It was just a malignant echo left at the place where he had died after waking up from the slumber. Sunny explored the island of flowers and found the remains of an enormous horse in its center, beautiful blossoms covering the white bones and growing through the holes in its skull. He didn't know how the black steed had ended up on this island and how it had died. Had it succumbed to the corruption, or had it remained steadfast until the end? All he knew was that the white flowers grew where Nightmare's blood had been spilled. His loyal shadow stared at the ancient bones for a while, then blew the air out of his large nostrils loudly and turned away with a solemn look. They hadn't gained much from this trip, but the dark steed seemed to have subjugated a powerful nightmare, adding it to his collection. The counter of the dream curse had risen significantly after slaying the dream wraith. The last stop they made was on the island where the creature of the lake had once bestowed the ruby knife to Cassie. The island was very close to the sanctuary, and was known as an extremely dangerous one, even when awakened dared to cross it. They always stuck to the edge of the isle, never approaching the tranquil lake. Sky Tide herself had been known to avoid this place, whether it had been because the abomination living in the lake was too powerful, or because Saint Tyrus had chosen to keep it there to prevent other nightmare creatures from drawing close to the citadel. No one knew, despite the danger. Cassie calmly landed the flying ship on the tranquil surface of the lake and let go of the steering oars, when Sunny gave her a questioning look and an awkward cough. The blind girl simply shook her head.
Don't worry, we'll be safe until the crushing subsides.
Not daring to leave the ship, they gathered on the deck and watched the calm water. At some point, Cassie unsheathed the quiet dancer, gently touched its blade, and then let go of the slender rapier. It flew straight up and then plunged into the water, straining under the weight of the crushing. A long time passed in silence. At some point, Cassie lowered her head and let out a heavy sigh. She said that it was empty and that it was gone, soon. The quiet dancer emerged from under the clear water and flew up with a flourish, sparkling brightly as the sunlight reflected from the drops covering its slender blade. The rapier landed in Cassie's hand and grew still, sheathing the echo. The blind girl silently went back to the runic circle and sent the ship into the sky. Her face seemed full of sorrow. For some reason, despite the fact that they were practically next to the sanctuary, none of them wanted to visit it. The idea of the familiar citadel without the White Feather clan seemed strange to Sunny. He didn't know who had been sent by Valor to oversee the Chained Isles instead of Saint Tyrus, and didn't care to find out, even though it wasn't their fault. The newcomers still felt like usurpers, instead of venturing into the sanctuary. The flying ship turned around and flew back west, cutting a straight line toward the distant Red Colosseum. It was going to take them a few days to return to the Ivory Tower. Once they did, the small vacation would be officially over, and Sunny would have to dive back into the coldness of Antarctica and the dirty war of the great clans. He felt slightly reluctant to return. On the last night before they reached the tower, Sunny found himself standing on the deck of the ancient vessel, looking at the myriad of stars above them through the branches of the sacred tree. There was the sound of steps, and Nephis approached to keep him company in silence. Together, they watched the night sky and thought about the future, what it would bring, what it would take, what it would cost them. After a long time spent in comfortable silence, Sunny glanced at Nephis, thought for a few moments, and asked,
"So, what do you make of this place?"
The other members of the cohort all had a deep connection to the Chained Isles. Sunny and Cassie had spent the most time here, but Effie and Kai were also deeply tied to the remains of the Kingdom of Hope. Their experiences in the nightmare weren't something one could ever forget. It was a place that had changed them. Nephis, on the other hand, was a stranger here. She could look at the Chained Isles as an outsider. So, he was idly curious about her perspective. Neph lingered for a while, then said quietly that it was as everywhere else. Broken, Sunny smiled.
"I guess the Chained Isles are more honest in that regard, aren't they? They don't hide their broken nature."
Indeed, the dream realm was a ruined world. The waking world was a ruin too, and the young woman standing next to him was the Star of Ruin, a fitting name for someone born of two broken worlds. He sighed.
"Still, I thought you would have more of an opinion. Don't you feel a connection to this land?"
Nephis glanced at him with a bit of confusion. He asked why she would. Sunny shrugged.
"Well, the Kingdom of Hope was destroyed by Sun God. He brought his fire down and obliterated it. You're the inheritor of that fire, are you not? Sun God's blood is flowing through your veins, so, in a sense, you're the last descendant of the being who brought ruin to this land."
Nephis remained silent for a while, then smiled.
I see, yes. It would make sense for me to feel a connection to Sun God. But actually, in this case, I feel more connected to Hope.
Sunny raised an eyebrow.
"The wicked demon who spent 1,000 years twisting the minds of everyone living in the ruins, driving them insane, and causing all kinds of unspeakable, abhorrent evil. The vile queen of madness, that Hope."
Neph tilted her head a little. She lingered for a few moments, and then said, Hope, who had everything that belonged to her destroyed by an impossible foe, who remained chained for 1,000 years, but never stopped trying to set herself free, who escaped her prison and waged war against the eternal gods, and killed them, that Hope. Sunny hid his smile.
Well, if you put it like that, actually I'm rather fond of Hope too. I met her once, you know.
For the first time in a long time, he saw Neph's usually calm expression crack a little. She looked at him with a startled expression.
You met Hope, the demon of desire.
Sunny nodded.
Well, a version of her at least, at the very end of the nightmare. I entered the tower and saw her for a few fleeting moments. She even spoke to me.
He hesitated for a few moments.
She told me that the demons were the flaw of the gods. I am not sure what she meant, though I always assumed that the gods were flawless.
Nephis frowned, then turned away and looked at the stars.
I heard that the gods were perfect beings once, but then they were no more. It doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? I also don't know what she meant.
She remained silent for a while, then said evenly,
It makes me wonder, though, did Sun God also have to pay a price to use his power? Did he have to burn? Did he have to suffer? Did it hurt him to destroy Hope's kingdom?
Nephis looked at the distant stars with a cold expression.
The gods could die, so they must have suffered too.
She stared at the black sky, then, slowly, a pale smile appeared on her lips. She said she hoped he had suffered a lot. Eventually, they returned to the Ivory Island. The sun was disappearing beyond the horizon, and the crescent moon became visible in the twilight sky. The five of them gathered on the shore of the clear lake, in front of a bonfire, to enjoy their last meal before their return to the waking world. The short respite was almost over. Sunny enjoyed the last of Neph's cooking he would taste in a while as he studied the faces of his companions. Nephis, Cassie, Effie, Kai. The shadows moved as the fire danced, painting them in shades of orange and gray. They seemed rested and relaxed. He felt at peace, too, after a while. Sunny turned his head to look at the lake, where the flying ship swayed gently on the surface of the water. A small frown appeared on his face.
Hey, we still haven't come up with a name for that thing, have we?
The others looked at him with confusion, then their expressions cleared. He asked, How about Sky Swimmer? Kai was the first one to speak. He thought for a few moments, and then smiled. Sunny gave him a measured look, making the handsome archer hesitate. He asked, What? He shook his head.
No, don't pay me any attention. I just think I understand now how your band ended up being called Night and Gale.
Both Kai and Nephis blinked. He asked, What's wrong with Night and Gale?
Night and Gale is an amazing band name.
Sunny smiled crookedly.
All right, there's nothing wrong with that name. Still, Sky Swimmer doesn't sound too majestic.
Kai looked down in embarrassment. He said, Well, on second thought, you're right. At that moment, Effie spoke. She said she had a great name in mind. Everyone turned to her, while the huntress threw a mischievous glance at Sunny.
This is a flying ship, right? It soars high in the sky, bathing in sunlight, so how about we call it the Sunful?
The corner of Sunny's eye twitched. He said, Next suggestion. Cassie hesitated for a few moments.
I really don't know. I would like to name it in honor of Noctes, but at the same time, this is the vessel of the Fire Keepers now. It was created to harvest divine flames, and in the future, it'll be the symbol of Changing Star and her people. Do we name it for the past or for the future?
Everyone looked at Nephis, who remained silent for a while. Eventually, she said,
Let's honor your friend, Noctes. Sunny knew him the best, so he's the best person to give the ship a name.
Sunny raised an eyebrow.
How come I ended up being the one to do it?
Still, it wasn't the bad kind of responsibility. He thought about Noctes, his self-proclaimed best friend, and about what Noctes had wanted, to break the will of gods and set Hope free from her chains. He also thought about Odysseus, and about his own desperate desire to be free. He thought about what Noctes had achieved, who was Noctes in the end. What words described him best? He called him a lying, dastardly cheat, after a while. Sunny let out a sigh and nodded.
Yes, I think I know I've a good name.
He looked at the graceful silhouette of the ancient ship and remained silent for a few moments. Eventually, Sonny said, "Chain breaker, let's call it that." It was a hot, lazy summer day. The sun bathed the northern quadrant siege capital in heat and light, making people long for the cool shade of the ventilated buildings. The sky was clear and vast, without a single cloud in sight, looking at its blue expanse. It was hard to believe that somewhere far away people were suffering in the darkness, assaulted by cold and dread. The chain of nightmares that was raging in the southern quadrant seemed so distant here. On that peaceful day, a young man in expensive clothes was sitting on a bench in a beautiful park, located in one of the more affluent districts of the city. The park was full of vibrant greenery and pleasant shade. The filtered air was crisp and clean. Everything here looked spotless and new. The young man was enjoying a cup of coffee as he watched children play on a nearby playground. There was an absent-minded smile on his handsome face. He seemed to be in a pleasant mood. He thought how curious. The young man observed the children. They were so strange, so innocent, fragile. It would take no effort at all to break them. But why would he? Watching the kids play was interesting and nice. And yet, he couldn't help but imagine what the playground would look like painted with their blood. Those images entered his mind on their own. The images were interesting and nice, too. He asked if all human children were like that. The young man had been a child himself, once, but he didn't really remember much about that time. He knew that he had been a timid kid who didn't start to speak until he was 4. Others made sure that he knew that, at some point, the old man came to claim him. The rest of his childhood had been spent in the dream realm. It was only much later, after the old man had discarded him, that he returned to the waking world. The waking world had felt alien then, and felt a bit alien still, but really, it was the young man who was the alien. He wondered if he was the strange one. It might have been an easy conclusion to draw, but it wasn't so easy for the young man. He had trouble imagining that others were different from him. It took a conscious effort to remember. At some point, there was a slight disturbance. One of the kids kicked a ball too hard, and it flew toward the young man, almost making him spill his coffee. The young man looked at the ball with displeasure. The culprit of his displeasure ran over and stopped a couple of steps away, looking at him with wide eyes. He said, "Sorry, mister." The kid was tiny and cute. He was maybe 5 years old with blonde hair, smooth skin, and blue eyes. He also had short legs, which made his run look rather comical. His neck seemed very thin and malleable. The young man smiled.
"No problem. You speak so well. I couldn't speak that well at your age."
The kid beamed with a bright smile. "I go to classes. Mommy takes me. I know alphabet too." The child looked at him with pity.
"I am never sad. I can't be sad."
The young man leaned forward and said,
"Of course, but first, answer me a question. That game you and your friends are playing, what's it called?"
The child seemed surprised. "Mister, that's football. Have you never played football?" The young man lingered for a few moments.
"No, there were no other kids where I grew up. I think I would have been great at football, though. Maybe I should become a kid and play some football. What do you think?"
His voice sounded as if he was genuinely contemplating doing just that. The kid smiled, thinking that it was a joke. The young man smiled, too, then pushed the ball toward the child, glanced at him one last time, and leaned back. The kid picked up the ball and shouted, "Thank you, mister." With that, he turned around and ran back to his friends. The young man didn't respond. In fact, he didn't move at all. His eyes were closed, as though he was enjoying a nap in the sun. A few hours later, long after the children and their mothers left, a woman taking a walk in the park passed the bench. A frightened scream suddenly disturbed the peaceful day. Someone shouted, "God, somebody help, dead, he's dead." Indeed, the young man was as cold as a corpse. He was, and had been dead, of course. Mordret was long gone, hiding in the eyes of the talkative kid. Extinguishing a mundane human soul was easier than, well, taking candy from a baby. But he hadn't taken the body of this child. He was just taking a ride, watching the world through the kid's eyes. Currently, they were walking back home, holding the kid's mother's hand. The woman was in her early 30s and very attractive. She was wearing expensive, but simple clothes, of course. Anyone who lived in the affluent district had the means to afford the best attire, but few were dignified enough to not flaunt their wealth. Every time the woman glanced at her son, she smiled warmly, which made Mordret feel a slight sense of amusement. He had no memories of his own mother, who who had died in childbirth when he was young, so this experience was rather new. Being loved by someone was interesting and nice, too, enough to make him want to kill the child and take his place. But Mordret didn't. Even a creature like him had principles. After all, well, not principles, inclinations, maybe. He wasn't inclined to kill someone without a decent reason, even if he wanted to, of course. His definition of what constituted a decent reason was different from the norm. Hiding in the kid's eyes, Mordret entered his home, uninvited.